Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to content, special content that is generally not available on YouTube or anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week: 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans? What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it. Our book today is How to Be Less Stupid About Race by Crystal M. Fleming. This is from the introduction, The Origins of Racial Stupidity. It opens with an epigraph from Martin Luther King Jr. It is an aspect of their sense of superiority that the white people of America believe they have so little to learn. From the introduction. Hundreds of years after establishing a nation on colonial genocide and chattel slavery, people are kind of, sort of, maybe possibly waking up to the sad reality that our racial politics are still garbage. But as our society increasingly confronts the social realities of race, we're faced with a barrage of confusing developments. How could the same country that voted twice for an Ivy League educated black president end up electing an overt racist who can barely string together two coherent sentences? Why do white liberals who can't even confront their Trump-supporting friends and families think that they can lead the resistance? Democrats who don't care about mass deportations or the treatment of Muslims under Obama suddenly care now that a Republican is in charge. While black and brown people are being crushed by systemic white supremacy, the rapper Common thinks we can all get over a race by extending a hand in love. Don Lemon still has a job. Rachel Dolezal exists. Everyone has an opinion about race, but 99% of the population has never studied it. And even many textbooks that talk about race are filled with lies, inaccuracies, and so-called alternative facts. With so much racial ignorance in the world, how can we ever find our way to that glorious mountaintop Martin Luther King Jr. glimpsed right before a white racist killed him? Although race is an inherently divisive topic, the cause of continual controversy, Facebook feuds, and endless debates, there is exactly one thing and one thing only that we can probably all touch and agree on, regardless of our racial or ethnic identity, gender, age, political beliefs, or shoe size. And that is that we are surrounded by racial stupidity. From the White House to Waffle House, from the classroom to the internet comments section, from the television to the tiki torch aisle of your local Pier 1, we are surrounded and at times astounded by the ignorant and dangerous ideas people express about this thing called race. Why are so many people so incredibly confused and misinformed about race? It's the white supremacy stupid. As I'll demonstrate throughout this book, one of the main consequences of centuries of racism is that we are all systemically exposed to racial stupidity and racist beliefs that warp our understandings of society, history, and ourselves. In other words, living in a racist society socializes us to be stupid about race. Of course, as you well know, some people are more afflicted by racial stupidity than others. We'll get into the nature of those variations a bit later. For now, I want to emphasize just how widespread and ubiquitous racial ignorance really is. Politicians routinely spout racist distortions of reality and lie about the existence and nature of racial oppression. Absurd racial stereotypes pervade our various forms of media. And as noted, textbooks systemically misrepresent racial history in ways that minimize or erase racism altogether. And all too often, teachers themselves are undereducated or miseducated about the history and ongoing realities of racial oppression. How to Be Less Stupid About Race explores precisely how and why racial stupidity has become so terribly pervasive, and examines the cesspool of silly ideas, half-truths, and ridiculous misperceptions that have thoroughly corrupted the way race and racism are represented in the classroom, pop culture, media, and politics. The key idea that I'll come back to again and again is that living in a racist society exposes us all to absurd and actually harmful ideas. that in turn help maintain the racial status quo. Drawing from my own experience as an educator and as someone who continually confronts my own racial ignorance, I'll also share some concrete steps that you, as well as your racist friends, ignorant family members, and clueless coworkers, can take to become less stupid about race and better equipped to detect and dismantle racial oppression. While I don't personally believe in post-racial utopias, and I don't put a lot of faith in reaching glorious mountaintops, I know for sure that the very first step in challenging racism is having a clear understanding of what it actually is. Not only are we surrounded by stupid ideas about race, we are even surrounded by stupid ideas about how to talk about race. In May 2015, Starbucks launched a doomed campaign called Race Together to encourage baristas and coffee drinkers around the country to have a conversation about race. Although many might have mistaken the campaign for a satirical entry on The Onion, Starbucks announced that its employees had the option of arbitrarily writing the hashtag #RaceTogether on a random customer's cup. Aspiring coffee drinkers minding their own damn business would then be obliged to say something to the barista about race. After a steady stream of criticism and mockery on social media by anti-racists across the color spectrum, yours truly included, the company eventually backpedaled and canceled the initiative. To some, encouraging random people to talk about race sounds like a step in the right direction. But we don't need more profit-driven corporations to take a stand and say that race is a legitimate and important topic of discussion. Rather than thinking about the best practices that might foster a productive discussion about race, the company executives thought best to just sort of tell everyone to figure it out without providing any educational resources, training, or guidelines whatsoever. In a letter to employees, Starbucks chairman Howard Schultz stated that he conceived of the idea, quote, not to point fingers and not because we have answers, but because staying silent is not who we are. And happy Thursday, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Wow. Wilbur Ross, the billionaire, offshore banker, you know, member of the cabinet, he's Trump's commerce secretary, comes right out and says, I don't understand why these federal workers are worried. I mean, they can borrow against their paycheck, can't they? Apparently, he thinks that federal workers all have like the same line of credit available to them that his children and grandchildren have available to them. It's like, no, they're going to payday lenders. And I mean, a lot of these people are making, you know, $30,000 a year. They're going to payday lenders, and particularly when they're a single family, you know, a single head of household in their family, they're going to payday lenders, and they're having to pay 400% interest because of the policies of the Trump administration and Republicans prior to him. I mean, this is mind-boggling. The billionaires are actively, and have been since 1981, since the beginning of the Reagan administration, actively working to turn America into a banana republic. Because it's a whole lot easier to extract enormous amounts of money from a banana republic. It's a whole lot easier to have a very, very corrupt political infrastructure when you're a banana republic. And the question I'm wondering this hour is, how do we stop the billionaires from turning us into a banana republic? Or is it already a done deal? And if it is, how do we roll it back? I mean, just look at this history since 1980. Right? Just look. This is the impact, the consequences of Reaganomics, trickle-down economics, a top tax rate below 50%. This whole shtick that Ronald Reagan brought us in 1981. In 1981, the median wealth, median means half the country's above it and half the country's below it, right? The median wealth of Black and Latino families was around $10,000. And the median wealth of a white family was in the neighborhood of $80,000. Today, the white family has a median wealth of around $147,000. The median wealth of a black family, $3,600. Latino family, $6,600. Since 1983, median wealth for all U.S. households has dropped by 3% when you adjust it for inflation. Over the same time period, The median black family saw their wealth drop by more than half. Meanwhile, the number of households with $10 million or more went up by 850%. In fact, if this path continues by 2050, the median white family will have $174,000 in wealth, which is pretty much where they are right now. Well, they'll be a little above that. They're at 147 right now. They go up to 174. Latino wealth will be at 8,600, slight increase. Black median wealth will go down to $600. I mean, this is like, you know, the billionaires are bringing us an economy that makes money off racial economic inequality. It's Chuck Collins writing about this for The Guardian, by the way. Chuck is an absolutely brilliant guy. And Wilbur Ross is like, well, I don't know what the problem is. They literally are turning us into a banana republic. The world's billionaires. This Bess Levin over at Vanity Fair writing, after Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said that, you know, we should tax income over $10 million at 70%, you know, some people, the Davos crowd had something to say about this. Scott Minard, who's the global chief investment officer at Guggenheim Partners, says, it's scary. By the time we get to the presidential election, this is going to gain more momentum. He says he'll be personally affected. In other words, he makes more than $10 million a year, right? And apparently barely scrapes by on his $10 million a year. He says, I think the likelihood that a 70% tax rate or something like that becomes policy is actually very real. It's scary. Ken Moelis, whose net worth hit $1 billion last April, claimed that Ocasio-Cortez's idea would be disastrous for the economy. He says, you have to incentivize people. Even in the U.S., what's going to happen to the two-family workforce? Oh, my God. You mean we have to have a two-family a two-person workforce, a two-workforce family? Excuse me, I quoted him wrong. What's going to happen to the two-workforce family? In other words, two people in the family working? Like, if you don't have that, you don't have an economy? Really? Steven Schwartzman, he's you know, at Davos. He's worth $13 billion. Back when Obama wanted to close the tax loophole that allows Steven Schwartzman and his friends, this is just for private equity firms like Mitt Romney's company, they only have to pay 15% interest or 15% income tax on their income because they call it carried interest. And when Obama proposed raising that 15% maximum tax that Steve Schwartzman pays, which, by the way, Obama ultimately didn't do. He wasn't able to pull it off. Because Congress wasn't able to pull it off. But when it was proposed, when President Obama proposed it, Steve Schwartzman said, it's war! It's like when Hitler invaded Poland in 1939. This is the same guy who has Patti LaBelle and Gwen Stefani, along with trapeze artists, live camels, and acrobats, perform for his parties. No, I'm not making that up. This is the world of our billionaires. And then Lara Trump. Is it Uday or Kusei's wife? Uday is Don Jr. and Kusei is Eric, right? I mix up which one was the tall one and which one was the weird one. In any case, Lara Trump, the wife of Eric, the person who was caught on tape offering Omarosa $15,000 a job, $15,000 a year, a job where she doesn't do anything, if she would just sign that non-disclosure agreement. She said yesterday, listen, it's not fair to you, and we all get that, but this is so much bigger than any one person. I mean, it's a little bit of pain, but it's going to be for the future of our country. And their children, the people who are losing their paychecks, and their children and their grandchildren and generations after them will thank them for their sacrifice right now. I know it's hard. I know people have families, they have bills to pay, they have mortgages, they have rents that are due. But the president is trying every single day to come up with a good solution here. This is our one opportunity. So I would just tell them, please stay strong. We appreciate everything that they're sacrificing. We're behind you. Right, Laura. Wilbur Ross, he says, I don't really understand why people can't pay their bills who are federal workers. He says, because as I mentioned before, the obligations that they would undertake, say borrowing from a bank or credit union, are in effect federally guaranteed. This is mind-boggling. He says, put it in perspective. He says, you're only talking about 800,000 workers. While I feel sorry for the individuals that have hardship cases, 800,000 workers, if they never got their pay, which is not the case, they'll eventually get it. But even if they never got it, you're talking about a third of 1% of our GDP. So it's not like it's a gigantic number overall. That's your billionaire commerce secretary. This is what happens when you have a billionaire cabinet and a billionaire president who are being cheered on by a news network owned by a billionaire. And half the people who are commenting on this are people who work for like Reason Magazine and things like that. I'm talking about on CNN, MSNBC, whatnot, who are funded by billionaires, right-wing billionaires. They are trying to break our government. Campbell Robertson has a great piece in today's New York Times. It starts out talking about Gustavo Costa. Gustavo has this rare expertise, critical for everything from space travel to fracking. And he's out of work right now. He works for a contractor. He is not going to get his paycheck made up. But he works for NASA, you know, as a contractor. And he says, I don't know what to do. Campbell Robertson in New York Times writing, these are vital, high-skilled federal workers, and there are usually companies that are willing to offer them 2 or 3 times as much money. But they like the idea, this John Kennedy idea, of service to country. And this has been the thing, and NASA calls it the mission, right? Why do people work for NASA when they can make more money working for SpaceX? Because of the mission. I'm serving my country. I'm part of something bigger than me. And what Trump is now saying, and what the billionaire class is now saying, and what Fox News has been saying for 30 years, is no. Working for the government means you've sold out. Working for the government means you become, you know, part of the problem and not the solution. It means you're the enemy. Now, how long are people going to want to continue working for our government? And what happens to our government when the really competent people leave and they get replaced by really incompetent people? Well, if you want to know the answer to that, just, you know, look at the EPA or the Interior Department at senior levels, at the level of the cabinet officers right now. They're starting to hemorrhage scientists. Why would the billionaires want to destroy the federal government? Why would they want to cause Americans to think that it's not a noble thing to work for NASA or for the EPA? Why would they want Americans to even think that people who go to work for the government are losers? Why would they inflict this lasting damage on the government of the United States, on we the people? Could it be that they're doing it because they actually hate the idea, the egalitarian idea of America? That they want to end the experiment that, you know, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson started, that we've been fine-tuning for 240 years? Is that why? What other possible reason could these billionaires have, other than hating the core idea of this country? And what do we do about it? How do you stop billionaires who they've seized the federal judiciary? Their Federalist Society is teeing up all the judges that Mitch McConnell is running like an assembly line through Congress? How do you stop that? In my mind, the way to stop them is to have a major wave, essentially. You know, the activism, as Bernie calls it, a political revolution. What do you think? It's 18 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Fair and only slightly unbalanced. Thom Hartmann here with you. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Jeremy in Woodland, California. Hey, Jeremy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. Been listening to you this morning and listening to some other news, and I think it's time for a revolution. We have to have a revolution. Joe Madison's idea about the airport down in Atlanta after the Super Bowl is a perfect example of you gotta inflict pain on these rich people so they begin to understand, because they have no feeling or no understanding of what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah, obviously. Let's make it very clear here, Jeremy, just because we're on, national radio and television. I'm assuming you're not talking about taking up arms or anything violent.
No. I'm talking about protests where we impact people financially, okay? Yeah. Where we make people a little uncomfortable.
And the Super Bowl, yeah, I think spot on. I think you're absolutely right.
But my real concern is when I listen to people talk about how, they can just go ahead and get a loan or a line of credit. People who make $30,000 a year cannot get a line of credit.
Yep. And not only that, what this is going to do, when people miss their credit card payments, when they miss their mortgage payment, when they miss their utility bills, that's going to damage their credit rating, which is going to make it harder for them to be functioning members of society long term. If they're not yet, if they don't yet have a mortgage, it diminishes their ability to get one. If they have credit cards, they may see their ratings go down. They'll see their interest rates go up. They'll see their credit limit going down. If they're trying to apply for student loans to upgrade their education, that's not going to be available to them. I mean, it just goes on and on and on from there. And
maybe Walmart and Target start to call Trump and tell him to open up the government so these people can come back to our stores.
Yeah. Well, as Wilbur Ross points out, right now it's only affecting 1/3 of 1% of GDP. And I would probably triple that number because, A, you've got 1.2 million federal contractors plus the 800,000 federal employees, and B, all of those people, when they're normally spending money, they're spending it into their neighborhoods and communities, into local stores and restaurants and gas stations and everything else, and that money kind of echoes through the economy. So typically you would double or triple the impact. So we're probably talking about 4 million people right now, maybe 5, who are having to hold their breath financially or are being wiped out financially or being damaged. That's not a large enough number yet that the billionaires are going to notice it, in my opinion, Jeremy.
Yeah, I agree.
So therefore, what we need to do, what people who are concerned about this and what people who are impacted by this need to do, is figure out ways to have number one, we all need to be figuring out, how do we get ourselves as independent as possible? Don't just live within your means, live way below your means and squirrel away as much cash as you can. But on top of that, how do we inflict that pain? I agree with you, Jeremy. I think Joe Madison's suggestion was a brilliant one. Jeremy, thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for watching us there on Free Speech TV in Woodland, California. It's 22 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with. I want to dig even a little deeper into this. What are the tools that the billionaire class are using to separate us from each other, to make us hate each other, to make us fear each other, and to make our society more dysfunctional so that they can scrape more off the top? Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So how do the billionaires keep us hating each other? How do they keep us upset with each other? How do they assert their economic dominance over this country via the method of political dominance? Historically, if you look at, the entire 240 plus years of American history and the 100 or so years before that, before this country became a republic, when we were, functioning as independent governments, the way that the wealthy oligarchs have kept the people, as it were, down is by causing people to fear and hate each other. It's called divide and conquer. It's a technique that goes back to the Roman Republic. The Romans used to do this. They would come into, they would take over a town, a neighborhood, a community, a country. They would identify people in that country and elevate some of them into positions of power. They would be the toadies to the Romans. And then they would also, they always did this. They would also identify people. In fact, there's a new book out called Mortal Republic that just lays this all out. It's mind-boggling. And then they would identify people in those communities who were going to be the scapegoats, essentially. And so they would say, you know, they would take over a community. So you're under Roman rule now, and you guys over here, all of you with, you know, this particular accent or this particular ethnicity or this particular religion or whatever it may be, you're the ones in charge now. And you get to take some of the tax money that ultimately comes to Rome, and, you know, you get all these benefits and perks. And those guys over there, this minority group, and it had to be like less than 20% of the population to be actually successful, because, you know, a true minority group, that minority group, they're the bad guys. And so let's everybody hate them. The Romans did this, the Greeks did this, Hitler did this with the Jews and with Catholics and with gays and with gypsies. Donald Trump is doing it right now with Muslims and Mexicans and Central Americans, people who, broadly speaking, generally speaking, have brown skin. Here we have, this is 18-year-old Vincent Ventromel, or Ventromel. He's an Eagle Scout. And he invited Trump to his Eagle Scout, you know, ceremony. He's the guy who, on Twitter, raged against the liberal Muslim horde. Yes, liberals and Muslims are the same thing. He wrote, "Kill them all," in all caps, and nobody will be left to attack us. This guy is so terrified that he wants to proactively kill liberals and Muslims. He was arrested in upstate New York along with 3 other young men because they were planning on going into this black Muslim community. It's been there for 100 years. It's called Islamburg in upstate New York. And they wanted to kill. They had 23 legally owned rifles and shotguns, makeshift bombs packed with nails and black powder. He refers to Muslim immigrants as rapefugees. He wanted the Muslim children to die. He's constantly ranting about crooked Hillary. He is calling for the construction of the border wall. He tweets, "Anybody who's played Minecraft knows if you want to keep people out who want to hurt you, shoot you, or blow themselves up, you build a wall, and anyone who gets over, under, or around the wall illegally, you kill until nobody else crosses into your land." And then he says, we have to go after the left-wing anti-fascists, too. He'd love to see somebody, quote, mowing them down. How do we stop the billionaires from feeding this hate?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Or how do we respond to this hate that is being fed by billionaires like Rupert Murdoch and the Tea Party Koch crowd? Our book today is Mortal Republic, How Rome Fell into Tyranny by Edward J. Watts. This is from the first chapter, which I think is really more like an introduction. This book explains why Rome, still one of the longest-lived republics in world history, traded the liberty of political autonomy for the security of autocracy. It's written at a moment when modern readers need to be particularly aware of both the nature of the republics and the consequences of their failure. We live in a time of political crisis when the structures of republics as diverse as the United States, Venezuela, France, and Turkey are threatened. Many of these republics are the constitutional descendants of Rome, and as such, they have inherited both the tremendous structural strengths that allowed the Roman Republic to thrive for so long, and some of the same structural weaknesses that led eventually to its demise. This is particularly true of the United States, a nation whose basic constitutional structure was deliberately patterned on the idealized view of the Roman Republic presented by the 2nd century BC author Polybius. This conscious borrowing from Rome's model makes it vital for all of us to understand how Rome's republic worked, what it achieved, and why, after nearly 5 centuries, its citizens ultimately turned away from it and toward the autocracy of Augustus. No republic is eternal. It lives only as long as its citizens want it. And in both the 21st century AD and the 1st century BC, when a republic fails to work as intended, its citizens are capable of choosing the stability of autocratic rule over the chaos of a broken republic. When freedom leads to disorder and autocracy promises a functional and responsive government, even citizens of an established republic can become willing to set aside long-standing principled objections to the rule of one man and embrace its practical benefits. Rome offers a lesson about how citizens and leaders of a republic might avoid forcing their fellow citizens to make such a tortured choice. Rome shows that the basic, most important function of a republic is to create a political space that is governed by laws, fosters compromise, shares government responsibility among a group of representatives, and rewards good stewardship. Politics in such a republic should not be a zero-sum game. The politician who wins a political struggle may be honored, but one who loses should not be punished. The Roman Republic did not encourage its leaders to seek complete and total political victory. It was not designed to force one side to accept everything the other wanted. Instead, it offered tools that, like the American filibuster, served to keep the process of political negotiation going until a mutually agreeable compromise was found. This process worked very well in Rome for centuries, but it worked only because most Roman politicians accepted the laws and norms of the Roman Republic. They committed to working out their disputes in the political arena that the Republic established rather than through violence in the streets. Republican Rome succeeded in this more than perhaps any other state before or since. If the early and middle centuries of Rome's Republic show how effective this system can be, the last century of the Roman Republic reveals the tremendous dangers that result when political leaders cynically misuse these consensus-building mechanisms to obstruct a republic's functions. Like politicians in modern republics, Romans could use vetoes to block votes on laws. They could claim the presence of unfavorable religious conditions to annul votes they disliked, and they could deploy other parliamentary tools to slow down or shut down the political process if it seemed to be moving too quickly toward an outcome that they disliked. When used as intended, these tools help promote negotiations and political compromises by preventing majorities from imposing solutions on minorities. But in Rome, as in our world, politicians could also employ such devices to prevent the republic from doing what its citizens needed. The widespread misuse of these tools offered the first signs of sickness in Rome's republic. Much more serious threats to republics appear when arguments between politicians spill out from the controlled environments of representative assemblies and degenerate into violent confrontations between ordinary people in the streets. Romans had avoided political violence for 3 centuries before a series of political murders rocked the Republic in the 130s and 120s BC. Once mob violence infected Roman politics, however, the institutions of the Republic quickly lost their ability to control the contexts and content of political disputes. Within a generation of the first political assassination in Rome, politicians had begun to arm their supporters and use the threat of violence to influence the votes of assemblies and the elections of magistrates. Within 2 generations, Rome fell into civil war, and 2 generations later, Augustus ruled as Roman emperor. When the Republic lost the ability to regulate the rewards given to political victors and the punishments inflicted on the losers of political conflicts, Roman politics became a zero-sum game in which the winner reaped massive rewards and the losers often paid with their lives. Above all else, the Roman Republic teaches the citizens of its modern descendants the incredible dangers that come along with condoning political obstruction and courting political violence. Roman history could not more clearly show that when citizens look away as their leaders engage in these corrosive behaviors, the Republic is in mortal danger. Unpunished political dysfunction prevents consensus and encourages violence. In Rome, it eventually led Romans to trade the Republic for the security of an autocracy. This is how a republic dies. Mortal republic.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just to catch up on a few things that we were talking about earlier in the week. Jerry Murphy is tweeting at me. He says, Tom, I would posit that the MAGA hats are not so much the modern-day Klan hoods as they are the new dunce caps. Whenever I see one, the first word that comes to my mind is dumb. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And then Grace tweets, Tom, I'll bet the banks love it when the Trump shutdown destroys credit ratings. They get to make more money off raising interest rates on people. Absolutely right. I mean, from the billionaire's point of view, this whole shutdown is actually a success. And this is all predicated on the so-called, oh my God, the caravans are coming, right? You know about the real caravan down on the Mexican border? 6,000 people a day crossing the border. 6,000 people a day crossing our southern border. At Los Algodones, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. Algodones is the name of the town. It's right across from Yuma, Arizona. 6,000 people a day cross right there. They are Americans going to Mexico for dental care and help. 6,000 Americans leave our country every day to go to this town in Mexico to have their teeth done. Why? Because you can save 80%. Why? Because Mexico has free college education for doctors and dentists. You have to serve the government for 1 year as a dentist after you graduate from dental school. In exchange for a free college education. Amazing. Anyhow, Steve in Park Ridge, Illinois. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, can you hear me?
Yeah, just fine. What's up?
Okay, I'm actually driving in Chicago. I'm at Jackson and Wells. Mm-hmm. I'm on my way to a rally at Federal Plaza. You know, we're going to rally against the shutdown, but something you said earlier, what can we do to confront the billionaire class? What really kind of surprises me is how the public sentiment out in the streets has kind of died down. I marshaled the 2 women's marches here in the city, 250,000, 300,000.
Oh, remember the Occupy movement, Steve?
Things have only gotten more dire, and there's just a trickle of folks nationally that are out showing their displeasure. We know that that's there, but, you know, I'm a grassroots organizer. I wish one of the larger organizations like Indivisible or Our Revolution, et cetera, would, you know, start having Saturday, Sunday type things. I'm retired, so I can come down on a Thursday, no problem. But I think, you know, we need to be in the streets, in other words.
Yeah, I'm with you.
As well as Twitter and Facebook, et cetera. What do you think?
I absolutely agree, Steve, and spot on, and good on you for going to that rally. And give us a shout tomorrow or next week and let us know how it worked out, okay?
Will do. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Good talking to you. Lynn in Rutland, Vermont. Hey, Lynn, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to answer your question that you have repeated several times today. What can we do?
Right.
I think that this situation requires that we invoke our Declaration of Independence. The man who suggested a revolution, I don't think he understands what happens when there are revolutions, especially if there's no real plan for what to do instead. And I find right now our people lack vision. I saw that in the Women's March, the many complaints, but very few answers. Mm-hmm. I think we need to teach each other how to love in our schools. Love is the one thing that people absolutely require. And to talk about how did it happen to get to this point, I have a very specific answer, and that is Operation Paperclip. Are you aware of what happened when 1,700 plus top Nazis were imported into this country between 1948 and 1956, following the Nuremberg trial?
Right, they populated the CIA. And the rocket programs.
The deep state, many different areas.
Yeah, well,
now,
you know,
Malcolm Howard.
I get it, Lynn, but you know, I think that right now we've got to. We also you invoked the Declaration of Independence. You know, let me just read: to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, not the billionaire class, and that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its power in such form as to them shall be most likely to affect their safety and happiness. And then he goes on to say, but when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Lynn, spot on. Thank you for the call. Ron in Yoder, Indiana. Hey, Ron, what's up?
Yeah, hey, Tom. We can end this in 20 minutes.
How's that?
You get the Teamsters, you get all the unions together, and you say, this is it.
It's a solidarity
We're
strike,
stopping.
a nationwide solidarity strike with federal workers. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, you know, we may be closer to that than we realize. There were 11 senior union members. I don't have a list. I've been looking around for a list who were arrested outside Mitch McConnell's office yesterday.
Right, I saw that.
Yeah, and so if this is radicalizing the senior, the management, the leadership of the unions across the United States, that's not an impossibility. I mean, that's the sort of, and then everybody goes into the streets and says, enough already.
That's it.
Yeah.
Shuts it down. It take 20 minutes, Tom. 20 minutes. They can't. You know how much money would be lost to these corporations in 20 minutes?
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right, Ron. I think you're absolutely right. Thank you for sharing that. That's a great idea. Norman in Chicago. Hey, Norman, your thoughts?
Yes, sir. Hello.
Yeah, you're on the air, Norman.
How you doing?
Good. Try to get your mouth as close to the microphone as possible. What's up?
I had a question regarding, no one's talking about the federal government employees and the money that's sitting in the banks. I mean, the banks right now are gaining interest. I mean, the banks have profit margins that are
huge,
higher than they've ever been in the last 10 years, I think.
Yeah, higher than they've ever been in history. Yes.
In history. So I want to know, how does that play when you have all these federal employees with the money still sitting in the bank? Does that profit margin or that interest for the 30 days, they gain interest daily, where does that go?
Oh, it goes to the bank's profit. If you're a federal employee and you go to your bank and you say, I need a loan, they say, fine, you're going to pay us interest on that loan, and that interest is that's how the banks make their profits. So yeah,
well, I get that, but the money that would normally be out of the bank that's called your salary, what's happening with that money that's still sitting there?
Oh, that's still sitting in the federal treasury right now. I mean, in other words, what's happening to the money that's not being paid to the federal employees? Is that your question?
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
it's still sitting in the federal government, and I don't know if the Treasury Department itself issues federal paychecks or if they use any of the big national banks. That's a question I don't know the answer to, but that's worth looking into, Norman. Thanks a lot for the call. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
Oligarchs, the oligarchy in America. Did you read, possibly as much as a year ago, the New York Times article about why the growth of oligarchy in America, the oligarchs in America, will continue to grow regardless of whether we change the system or not? If not, it was rather disturbing.
Yeah.
It's all about inherited wealth now.
Oh, yeah.
The amounts of wealth are, in many instances, so enormous that they are now then divided up amongst the various children. And where there was one oligarch before, suddenly there are 3 and 4 with billions of dollars each under their belt. How that is going to affect the future of the United States.
Just the Walton family has more wealth than 40% of the world.
Yeah, yeah. And that's not yet divided. Keep in mind, all of those people have children, and down that line, those really hundreds of billions, when you total the Walton wealth up, will all be divided amongst several other people, and there it goes. It's almost a...
And these are the people, by the way, Nicholas, who tell us loudly through their think tanks that they fund and through the news networks and right-wing hate radio that they fund, tell us loudly that if people can get a welfare check, if people can get food stamps, they're not going to work. I mean, that's, you know, this is what we heard from one of these billionaires in Davos this morning. You know, what's going to happen to the two-worker family? I mean, you know, this is going to hurt the economy. And their own children don't have to work, and their grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren will never have to work. And they're the ones sitting around going, oh, you got to give people incentives to work. Take away their health care. Take away their health insurance. Take away their food stamps. Get them scared out there. You got to do that. It's so important. While they're sitting on their billions and billions of dollars.
People have nothing to say about that. You take away food stamps and Walmart collapses, right?
Yeah. Yeah, actually.
And listen, as far as what do we do about it, what can be done about it, you have to do what was just done down here in Mexico. You're tired of hearing me talk about Mexico, but, you know, you've got to upend the entire system. You cannot attack the system from the top. The top simply does not care. A very smart psychiatrist friend of mine, who is basically the godfather of psychotherapy in New York City, once told me, he said, never try to understand crazy. It will only drive you crazy. Well, we can't try to understand how the oligarchs think or don't think. They do not care about us. We are not even on the radar. They live an entirely different life. Nothing is going to change.
So how did this...
And we can't be distracted by the fight from the bottom up, if you will.
Yeah, I know. I absolutely agree, Nicholas. I think most Americans are not at all familiar with what happened in Mexico. Most Americans don't know about AMLO and who he is and what the deal is and why people elected him. You want to give us a 1-minute crash course?
Yes, thank you. AMLO is instituting a micro funding.
He's the new president.
Yes. He's starting a program of microfinancing for the people at the very bottom. Vegetable sellers in local markets, et cetera, they're going to get a $350 loan, 0 interest, pay it back within the year, and automatically the loan it continues on ad infinitum. This is going to change a lot. And here's a scary thing. You're not going to like to hear this. No one is, because Trump's already gone crazy over the last caravan. Mexico has just issued 10,000 temporary immigrant visas in the last 6 days.
Whoa. Now, is that to divert people from heading to the United States, or is that to facilitate people heading to the United States?
Not to facilitate, but it is partly to divert. The idea is to give them 1 year right to work within Mexico in order to redecide, or continue on if they're heading north. That's fine. They're not going to try to stop them, but they're hoping that many will continue to stay in Mexico, given the full rights of work and access to all services within Mexico.
So Mexico is saying, gee, immigrants revitalize your economy. Immigrants, immigrants do good things. Yes. Immigrants bring skills. Even if it's just manual labor, they bring enthusiasm. Immigrants are good for our country, so we're going to encourage these immigrants. Yeah. At the same time that Trump and the United States are just shooting ourselves in the foot. No. Amazing. Nicholas, it's always great to hear from you, and thank you for your thank you, and thank you for your great work helping moderate our chat room on YouTube. It's much appreciated. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. We'll be back. It's 47 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. We'll be right back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
How do we facilitate a progressive political revolution? How do we take on the billionaire class when they are so entrenched? And welcome back. Arthur in Durham, North Carolina. Hey, Arthur, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Thank you. How's it going, Tom?
Good.
I just wanted to talk about kind of how these billionaires got to this point. And I just started reading this book called Wealth and Democracy by Kevin Phillips.
Oh, yeah.
And basically how he talks about, these guys really started right after the 70s or 80s because, after – well, it's talking about how McKinley was basically like the first, bought and paid for president, and how, after the Great Depression, like a lot of people became like adverse to the rich and wealthy in America, and so during I think it was FDR or Ted Roosevelt or whatever, one of the two, they instituted a lot of policies that that made the middle class what it is because of how people felt about rich. People were very suspicious of them.
Yeah, Teddy did it in 1901 to 1909 by breaking up big trusts and by instituting an inheritance tax. And then Franklin Roosevelt, a generation later from 1932 to 1945, did it by, raising that top tax rate to 91%. And by a whole plethora of programs, unionization, legalizing unionization, long-term unemployment, the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, the Civilian Construction Corps or Conservation Corps, the CCC, all these, he put people back to work basically and said, the government will be the employer of last resort when capitalism fails. He stabilized the banks with Glass-Steagall. I mean, all this stuff was all put together back in the 30s, and this is the stuff that the Republicans are enthusiastically deconstructing as they've been doing since Reagan. Back to you, Arthur.
I completely agree, and I just wanted to add that I guess I was kind of saying during the 70s, I guess prosperity had been so good that people kind of forgot about, like how it got to be so good, through the regulation and all the, things he was doing. He was basically going off about, how this kind of a resurgence in like a plutocracy basically in like the 80s and the 90s with, the Bush and the Reagans.
Yeah.
And he was going off kind of, how he had his first book in 1990, Rich and Poor, I think it was.
Actually, Kevin Phillips' first book was back in the 1960s, as I recall. And he was talking about the new Republican majority. He was at that time he was a conservative Republican, and he sure flipped his worldview in the 90s when he looked back and saw the damage that the philosophy that he had endorsed did to this country.
Of the country, but I feel like they steal for all of the rich, and that's why they're constantly put in the positions they're put in. And also at the same time, like Americans, we live with less and less, but we're like urged to buy more and more. So it's like I just saw this commercial about a car. If your car breaks down, you should buy this car shield thing or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's like people make less money, and at the same time they tell you to buy this and the third because you can't afford a $400, a $400 expense. So buy this, $31 or $30 or $50 a month, little service, and if your car breaks down, you will be able to pay for it, not knowing that you basically.
Yeah, I think most Americans don't realize, Arthur, that poverty actually presents opportunities for big business. And once people slide into poverty, they're usually destined to go deeper and deeper into poverty because of exactly what you're talking about, because they don't have the ability to maintain themselves, and with every little hit, they fall deeper and deeper down. And it's just so wrong. We need to have a social safety net that catches people before they start falling like that. Arthur, thank you so much for the call. We'll be right back. Here at the Thom Hartmann Program, we're creating basically 3 programs identically at the same time. We've got the normal commercial program. We have our television program that is carried by Free Speech TV, and we do fundraisers for Free Speech TV, and a small amount of that money comes back to us, which helps us provide that show to Free Speech TV. So that stream has its own revenue stream in it. And then we also provide a nonprofit radio show with no commercials in it that's completely nonprofit compliant to our Pacifica affiliates, to the stations all over the country, nonprofit stations. We pay for that one because we don't charge them by your support at Patreon. And in exchange for that, over on Patreon, you can get the full 3-hour show, archives of the show, and special clips like this amazing clip that we're just now putting up about 6 ways America is becoming a third world country. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope this clip was useful to you, and thanks so much for supporting our program.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Adela in Los Angeles. Hey, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Hello?
Hey, Adela. You're on the air.
Oh, hi. Sorry, I cut off. Good morning. Thank you for this question. It's amazing. It's so funny that you said a couple of calls back, the think tank, because that's exactly what I was calling about. A lot of people, like a lot of businesses, even Edison used to have like thinking boxes, thinking banks. And these people get paid like $66,000 a year just to work there, right? Why? What happens when you put people in a room to sit and think about issues, to think about being creative, to think about a sales pitch. You get people talking, and then you get different points of views. You get different ways of doing something and accomplishing something in the end. So why don't they want us to? Why don't they want us to be united? They want us to be divided, like you said. They don't want Latinos. Like I'm Guatemalan, and there's so many people all throughout growing up. Mexicans hate Guatemalans, and Guatemalans hate Salvadorians, and I'm like, why? We're all the same people. I just went to the Martin Luther King march, and I had a couple of people tell me, be careful, because I went by myself, be careful going to South Central by yourself because you're Latina. And I'm like, I'm going to be fine. I ended up meeting so many people. Why? Because I went with a good energy, and I communicated. I'm not going to be scared of the people that we're in the same boat. We're fighting the same fight, and I don't understand why people don't understand this.
But this is what the billionaire class wants to do, is to keep us fighting with each other, to keep us going after each other. Yeah, I would say even to the level of politics. I mean, why did they fund the Tea Party? Why did they even want, white people hating each other, right? Liberals and conservatives and things like this. It is divide and conquer. This is, Rome 1.0.
And all these businesses, they are smart. They know, marketing, advertising, they all study psychology. So they know what makes us tick, what makes us uncomfortable, about ourselves, self-conscious. So as long as they keep us self-conscious, kind of relating to the guest the person that just called before, why do they keep us buying?
Right.
Because they keep us self-conscious about ourselves. So if we don't love ourselves and we don't teach our children to love themselves, we're always going to be in the same situation, we need to become more self-reliant. If an earthquake happens here in California, what happens? We're going to, die because we're so used to going to Ralph's and Trader Joe's?
Yeah,
I
get it. Adela, I want to get another caller in here. I've got just 1 minute left in this hour. Thank you for the call. Ann in Van Nuys is also listening on KPFK. Hey, Ann, what's up?
Hi, I want to send you this issue of Avenue out of Palm Beach, and I'd like to also send you a couple of copies of Quest magazine. It is about this group you're talking about, and I think we need to get on the inside and understand them. I know many of these people peripherally, and I've got to say that we have got to start prosecuting white-collar crime.
Yeah.
We've got to start holding accountable these people, and we've got to get to a judiciary on the local level that has the strength of character and integrity, that understands. And the more you understand and know about these people, the less you are intimidated.
And on TV in Los Angeles or in Van Nuys, are they running the same ads they are here in Portland about, get the judges on the bench? This is the billionaire class funding an ad campaign to encourage Mitch McConnell to change the Senate rules so they can put even more right-wing judges on who will make it easier for white-collar criminals?
They determine our society. They are the ones who decide who will be prosecuted, who will not be prosecuted. And it is white billion-dollar crime that has been contributive to this issue that we're now dealing with. If we remember when Walmart had the class action suit was dismissed, and they issued guidelines to their workers to economize and to learn to live with less. I mean, this is an attitude that has to change.
Yeah, I'm with you. And if you want to communicate with me, if you want to send me information, just tweet me links. That's the very best way to do it. And thank you so much for the call. We'll be right back. We're going to be talking with Dr. Richard Wolff right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to content, special content that is generally not available on YouTube or anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week: 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans? What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it. Confessions of a Rogue Nuclear Regulator by Gregory B. Jackso, former chairman of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I'm going to start with the last paragraph of Chapter 1, and then I'll start reading Chapter 2. In hindsight, the Fukushima incident revealed what has long been the sad truth about nuclear safety. The nuclear power industry has developed too much control over the NRC and Congress. In the aftermath of the accident, I found myself moving from my role as a scientist impressed by nuclear power to a fierce nuclear safety advocate. I now believe that nuclear power is more hazardous than it's worth. Because the industry relies too much on controlling its own regulation, the continued use of nuclear power will lead to catastrophe in this country or somewhere else in the world. This is a truth we must all confront. Chapter 2. The Fukushima accident in Japan was not the first accident to belie the promise of nuclear power. In its early years, the commercial nuclear industry had only a limited understanding of the operations, science, and engineering of actual power plants. This ignorance led to the first major nuclear power plant accident just outside Harrisburg, the state capital of Pennsylvania, in 1979. 3 Mile Island prompted a flurry of reforms and a pile of promises that the public would be protected from future nuclear calamities. Through the mid-1980s, it appeared these promises were being kept. Construction on new plants slowly resumed without major accidents. Then suddenly, strange radiation measurements were detected in Sweden. Governments in Europe and throughout the world soon learned that a disaster had occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in the Soviet Union. Like a developing photograph in a bath of chemicals, the reality of nuclear power was starting to come clear. One nuclear accident was an oversight, a mistake, an aberration. 2 nuclear accidents hinted at a serious problem with the technology. A third would cement the conclusion that nuclear power plants were simply going to have accidents on a relatively consistent schedule. After 3 Mile Island, after Chernobyl, the third accident nearly occurred in 2002 at the troubled Davis-Besse nuclear power plant in Ohio. The problem is that with each new accident, all the people in charge of nuclear safety seemed to revert to the belief that this one would be the last one. As chairman of the NRC, I battled nearly every day against this instinct to believe that the worst was over. You can prepare for the next accident only if you get all the players to admit that a next one is coming, even if and when are impossible to predict. Before Fukushima, too many people I encountered simply did not believe the next one would ever come. Their view is not surprising. Accidents are rare, and Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island had happened decades earlier. Yet I continue to believe I could challenge this complacency. I seized one opportunity just after I became chairman. 4 days before President Obama tapped me to lead the commission, I spoke at a conference organized by the North American Young Generation in Nuclear, an industry group of professionals entering the field as nuclear operators, designers of reactors, or academic experts in nuclear technology. As I looked out at the crowd, it dawned on me that many of these people had never lived through a nuclear power accident. Even if I had been only 9 years old when 3 Mile Island occurred, when Chernobyl happened, I was a teenager, more worried about surviving my freshman year of high school than about nuclear disaster. The people I was speaking to were even younger. I wondered how they had experienced these seminal events. Being a scientist, I decided to conduct an experiment. I asked everyone in the audience to stand if they were born after 1979, the year of 3 Mile Island. Nearly everyone stood. After they sat down, I asked them to stand if they were born after 1986, the date of the Chernobyl accident. Once again, nearly everyone stood. These industry-defining accidents have become dry case studies taught in college classes. The next generation of American nuclear power professionals has never experienced the confusion of a nuclear accident as it is happening. And so it's essential that we remember and teach the lessons of 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, for reviewing these accidents shows common themes of missed opportunity, human failings, and technological overconfidence. No amount of forgetting can change these simple facts. The March 1979 accident at the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania seems almost like something out of a science fiction horror film. The cover of Time magazine captured the national mood of chaos, confusion, and fear. The emergency read phrase "nuclear nightmare" slashed across the dark black cooling towers of the plant. There was no live-streamed video, as there would be after the Fukushima accident, but the public could imagine the scene inside the reactor. Just 12 days before the accident, The China Syndrome, a feature film starring Jane Fonda and Michael Douglas as reporters who uncover a major incident in a nuclear plant, had been released. Perhaps the hundreds of journalists gathered outside Harrisburg believed they too would land such a story. It started on March 28th at around 4 a.m. when a water pump stopped working. The failed pump affected the steam generators, large cylinders filled with many tiny metal tubes that help turn hot water from the nuclear engine into steam so that the turbines can generate electricity. When the flow of water was cut off, this massive heat exchange stopped working, creating the conditions for a serious accident. The reactor engine was immediately turned off, but so long as the reactor fuel remained hot, which it would for quite some time, its natural radioactive decay would continue, producing enough heat, called decay heat, to melt through the metal containers enclosing the reactor fuel. This same problem would later affect Fukushima. And then he goes through the whole process there. Confessions of a Rogue Nuclear Regulator by Gregory B. Jackso.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Dr. Richard Wolff. And Professor Wolff is an economist. He's the co-founder of democracyatwork.info is the website. rdwolf with 2fs.com is the other website. He's the author of numerous books. His most recent, Capitalism's Crisis Deepens. And you can tweet him at Prof. Wolff, Profwolff. Professor Wolff, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
Let me set you up with a juxtaposition. We have billionaires in Davos on the one hand who are like Wilbur Ross this morning, the billionaire commerce secretary in Trump's cabinet, said, well, I don't know what's wrong with these federal workers. Why can't they just go to their bank or credit union and get a loan? So you've got that, this kind of cluelessness, and then you've got another billionaire in Davos yesterday was quoted as saying that, if Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's suggestion of a 70% tax rate over $10 million happened, what would happen to 2 wage earner households? We have to have 2 people working in a household to keep the economy humming. So we got that on the one hand. We've got these bizarre, clueless oligarchs meeting in Davos. And then on the other hand, you've got the country that Mike Pence pointed out yesterday or the day before, that Venezuela has the second largest oil reserves in the world, outside, second to the Middle East, the region of the Middle East. And, we're starting to seriously mess with not just their economy, we've been doing that for some time, but also with their government. We're not recognizing Maduro's reelection, and we're saying, no, this 35-year-old guy who's, into libertarianism and billionaires, he's actually the one we're going to recognize as the president of Venezuela. Do you see a common theme here?
Yes, I see a system that is exploding, that is producing these kinds of absurd contradictions and very, very extreme behavior. It's been coming. It's been noted for quite a while. The cluelessness that you refer to, it also blew my mind, particularly Commerce Secretary Ross's commentary. It shows you that the divide is so severe that literally the people on the two sides not only don't understand each other, but what is much worse is they're able to understand the other one in terms of fantastic make-believe, and that's a sign of severe disruption of society. And I think for me, it's sort of the last milestone on a society that cannot hold itself together and seems to imagine that that's not a problem. Although I have been reading papers that have circulated at the Davos conference that indicate quite a few big investors are aware, have overcome this divide, and are warning the folks gathered there, these super rich politicians and CEOs and so on, that the social divide is threatening everything they have and everything they do. And so there are even panels on that subject, and those panels then have a few people saying, look, this is terrible, we have to deal with the social divide. And then the other side, like Ross and the politicians particularly, needing to pretend everything is rosy and lovely. It's quite a spectacle. For me as an economist, it's clear to me that the society is polarizing. It's clear to me that capitalism's justification for most of the post-World War II period was the claim that it created and sustained a large middle class. If you're a society that is held together around that idea and you are systematically eviscerating the middle class, you ought to be worried about where that leads.
Yeah. Somebody tweeted to me this morning that the Roman Republic and the Greek Republic both lasted about 250 years. Is that the period of time it takes for corruption to finally overtake a democratic or quasi-democratic experiment? Is that just too facile? Is that just too cute? Or is there something to that?
Oh, no, I think there's something to it, and I think it links perfectly, which is probably why it occurred to you, to the extraordinary behavior in Venezuela. You have an election there, like most elections, it's got its problems and its flaws and all the rest, but you have an election, you have an elected government. The United States doesn't like the elected government, so it is deciding to give the government to somebody else. And this in a country where the United States tried with the previous leader, Hugo Chavez, to bump him out of office, only to have that come back and destroy the relationship between that country and the United States. I mean, maybe the phrase "Make America Great Again" literally means going back to the old colonial imperialist days of manifest destiny in the United States. But this is a society that can't control itself internally, and at that moment, instead of facing that problem, is overreaching around the world, trying to control what happens in Afghanistan, what happens in Iraq, what happens in Syria, and now opening yet another front. It does remind you of Greece, Rome, the British Empire, at a certain point imploding because it cannot face its real problems and keeps overreaching until it literally destroys itself.
Now, there are those who suggest that the British Empire, since you mentioned that, and by the way, it would be a fascinating thought experiment, or maybe a science fiction novel, to wonder what would have happened if, after the election here in November of 2016, the European Union said, well, Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes. We're going to recognize her as the legitimately elected president of the United States. We're not going to talk to Trump. But in any case, back to the British Empire, it has been suggested, or in fact, I don't even remember where I learned this or read this, but it was many years ago, that the reason that the British Empire survived essentially its own collapse, after World War I and World War II, or in that region, the first part of the 20th century, that time region, was because they turned to democratic socialism, because they built out a national health care system, because they built a strong social welfare system, because the loss of empire brought with it a major economic and political shock, and that by cushioning the blow at the bottom, they increased the resilience of their country and were able to make it through. And in fact, I was talking with Kate Pickett day before yesterday, who just who wrote The Spirit Level, and she and Richard Wilkinson do this brilliant stuff on inequality, and she was talking about how this has been ripped apart basically since Maggie Thatcher came in, making Britain all the more vulnerable. What are your thoughts on that? And is there a cautionary tale for us here?
Absolutely, and I think it's true of a number of other European countries. The crisis of the Great Depression laid waste to France, to Germany, to Italy, to most of continental Europe, and it kind of provoked in those societies a fundamental split. Some of them went to the left, like France. Some of them went to the right, like Germany and Italy. But the capitalism as we knew it was obliterated in those societies in favor of either a leftist solution of a kind of general democratic socialism, or in the case of Germany and Italy, fascism, and then the war between these polarities happened. That's why I say you have to be extraordinarily blind not to see the danger in what is happening domestically, now compounded by the United States being at war in half a dozen countries and adding new military conflicts. If the military in Venezuela does not go with this new guy declaring himself the leader, what is going to happen there? And what is the United States going to do once it is now implicitly involved in what may become a civil war? Nobody's asking the questions. There's this knee-jerk political behavior trying to cope with this or that aspect without facing that the underlying economic system is not working to sustain the kind of economy Americans have come to expect, and that's a recipe for dissent.
Yeah, and I would add to that that the political system has been corrupted now by the people who've corrupted the economic system. Brilliant stuff, Dr. Richard Wolff. It's always great talking with you. Thanks so much for dropping by today.
Okay, and talk to you again soon. Indeed.
DemocracyAtWork.info and rdwolf with 2fs.com are the websites. You can tweet him at ProfWolf, PROFWOLFF. His most recent book, Capitalism's Crisis Deepens. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
15 minutes past the hour, well, and change. We're going to check in with Dean Obadal in a few minutes and continue our conversation. What do we do about these billionaires? And welcome back. Wayne in Redding, California, listening on KFOI. Hey, Wayne, what's up?
Hey, hi, Tom.
Hey, Wayne.
I propose a solution that my grandmother told me all the way back in 1972 during the Nixon administration. She said at that time that the greatest threat to democracy is inherited wealth. And for decades, I didn't really understand what she meant until basically our current crisis. I would argue that basically three things have to happen. One, we basically have to create an estate tax where we're taxing assets on a by-decade basis, and I would to basically cut the billionaires back down to being merely wealthy instead of masters of the universe.
Right.
And then apply antitrust and too-big-to-fail legislation to corporations. And I'll take my answer off the air.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, Wayne. I started a couple of websites, nobillionaires.com, net, and org, as I recall, and I'm not sure if any of them are still up now. But, you know, basically, if you can't live on $999 million, then you've got a problem. And this is what Teddy Roosevelt did. I mean, we've had inheritance taxes, substantial inheritance taxes, as high as 50% in this country, and they do in many other parts of the world. It's way, way, way down now. And I absolutely agree. And I think I would add to that we should add a wealth tax as well. Wayne, thanks. Excellent points all. Brenda in Copperas Cove, Texas. Am I saying it right, Brenda?
Yes, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I have a solution as well for our congressional leaders and their lack of doing anything.
Okay.
We need to postcard their congressional addresses and respectfully give them some suggestions, like there's no immigration crisis at the southern border. There's a constitutional emergency at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Whatever we want to write, just be respectful, say what you think. You know, don't be like angry or anything like that. Try to come across very nicely. Do that, do the writing part, and then also call your Congress people, mine are Cornyn, Cruz, and Roger Williams. Call them and ask them to tell Mitch McConnell to tear down the Senate blocking wall.
Yeah, well said. Very well said. Thank you, Brenda.
Thanks for all you do, Tom.
You're welcome. Good talking with you. Scott in Portland. Hey, Scott.
Hi, Tom. Yeah, I just got a quick one, maybe a little rebranding. We're being concerned about the Russian oligarchs or the Chinese oligarchs or the domestic oligarchs. Maybe we should just refer to them collectively as all of the garks.
Ha! All of the garks.
Then they become garks, and I kind of like that.
Right, turn garks into a meme. Garks, I'm assuming, is a Greek or Latin suffix. Do you know if it's used in any other context?
I don't, but I imagine that's true.
Yeah, oligarchy. I'm trying to think of any other words that end with that.
Yeah,
I'd have to Google it.
Yeah. But it just occurred to me when as I'm hearing this oligarch this and oligarch that, I'll just call them all the garks.
Yeah, there you go. I love it. Scott, thanks a lot for the call. This is, we are facing really, in my opinion, in a very real way, an existential crisis. And a large part of this existential crisis that we're facing is these billionaires funding things like Fox News, Rupert Murdoch, a billionaire, obviously Donald Trump, the right-wing think tanks, the right-wing vehicles, the right-wing shows, the right-wing radio. All this stuff has this, Rush Limbaugh getting $1 million a year from the Heritage Foundation, as Ken Vogel wrote for Politico, as well as Sean Hannity. All to make us hate each other, all to cause us to fight with each other. Dean Obadala is up next. Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to content, special content that is generally not available on YouTube or anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week, 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans? What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
On 6 to 9 p.m. on Sirius XM Progress Channel 127. He's also columnist with the Daily Beast and just published an absolutely brilliant piece for the Beast about how this, in fact, I was talking about it in the first hour of the program, a MAGA plot, this is the headline, a MAGA gang plots to murder Muslims in Islamburg after Fox fans fear and flames. Dean, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me back on. I appreciate it.
So tell us what's going on here, and in the largest context possible. Why would a billionaire-funded television network work for years? I mean, you track this back to, as I recall, like 2007. Work for years to cause Americans to hate each other.
Well, in this specific case, I mean, in general, I assume the bias is, of course, to ratings. It's about profits, and in their view, that made the most sense to get more people to tune in and say, it's us against them, and here's the them. Let's watch our channel and only hear from us. In the case of Muslims, I think they made that same calculation that painting Muslims as the other and scary, which wasn't that hard of a sell at the time when there was terrorism going on more commonly, that we're going to do that. We're going to make you afraid of Muslims, and specifically they did a lot with Islamburg, which is about 2 hours from New York City. It's a community started in 1980 by primarily African-American Muslims who wanted to leave New York City to live a quiet life up in the forest areas, in a way, the wooded area of Islamburg, but it's completely developed where they live, in houses and homes and a mosque, and it's close to another town. But unfortunately for them, Fox News made a decision in 2007 to paint them as a terrorist training camp, and continued in articles and on air telling their viewers that this is a terrorist training camp.
Well, it was for Fox, it was the jackpot. I mean, it was Muslims and they're black people. Oh, my God!
I know. What do they dislike more? It's hard to say, but this is the world that this community has lived through. And,
so what's the consequence of this been?
I'm sorry?
What's the consequence of Fox's demonization of them been?
Well, various things. I mean, the newest thing is a story I wrote about was the terrorist plot uncovered early this week in a town called Greece, New York, where it's about 3.5 hours from Islamberg. But these young guys, 3 young guys and one 16-year-old teenager, were plotting to commit a terrorist attack on Islamberg and apparently to kill them. That's what the chief of police said. He said, you know, there's no doubt about it. They carried out this plot. People were going to die. That's was his words about it. And the police recovered mason jars filled with projectiles like BBs and other items that, if detonated the way it was planned, it was an IED, would have killed people. And
well, before that there was
23 guns.
And before that there was Robert Doggett.
Robert Doggett from Tennessee was recruiting other people. Robert Doggett is an extremist Christian minister. I hate to even say he's Christian, but in his view he is. He was doing this for God. And he's 63 years old, so it's a complete divide in generation, who believed that Islamberg was a place for terrorists. He plotted and had guns, explosives, even a machete, he said, to cut them to shreds. Thankfully, the FBI uncovered that, and he was arrested, prosecuted, and last year sentenced to 20 years in prison. So these are not taunts.
Shades of Rwanda.
Terrorist plots. They get no media coverage almost whatsoever, frankly.
I mean, this reminds me of the Rwandan genocide that was whipped up by talk radio.
Well, you know, it's...
Go hate those guys. I mean, has Fox evidenced any willingness to take responsibility for this?
Of course not. This is Fox News. And, you know, of the 4 that were just arrested, one was, and we know just about one right now from his social media postings, was a big Trump supporter. Yeah. He invited Trump to, when he was getting his Eagle Scout award, he invited Trump to that via Twitter, of course, not personally. But in his room, he had Confederate flags. He ranted about Muslims, saying he wanted to kill them, even their children, saying the Quran tells them to kill us. So they're all guilty. He is a big MAGA guy. And, you know, I don't know. You can direct a line between Trump and these kids, perhaps not. But you can say definitely that Donald Trump is a man who called for a total complete shutdown on Muslims, who during his campaign did his best to demonize and gin up fear of Muslims, saying we knew where the Muslim terrorists are hiding, continued to say that the family members of any terrorist knew what was involved in the terrorism and they should be killed as well. So it's not a vacuum. And there are other incidences that have happened with terrorists who have plotted to kill Muslims. But the reality is in America, our media, if a Muslim is a suspect, it gets a great deal of coverage. If the Muslim is the target, the media doesn't cover it. And that's not just my view. The Institute for Social Policy and Understanding quantified this. They went through media coverage over years in big print publications like the Washington Post, the New York Times, not even Fox News, in more mainstream media. And they found if the suspect was a Muslim, got 8 times the coverage of a non-Muslim in a foiled terrorist plot. I don't even mean one that actually happened, because some might say, well, the Muslims were able to kill people. That was a bigger story. We're talking about foiled terrorist plots, because even in mainstream media, not even Fox News, these stories get clicks.
Yeah,
they get ratings.
and when the terrorists are white guys and who have been guilty of the majority of terrorist murders in the United States in the last 30 years, when the terrorists are white guys, not so much.
Exactly.
Amazing.
The new report ADL came out yesterday, 50 extremist murders last year, and every one except for one tied to right-wing extremists. There's a new report yesterday from the ADL.
Absolutely amazing. Dean Obadala, host of the Dean Obadala Show. Hang on just a second, Dean.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
He's on Sirius XM Progress, channel 127, 6 p.m. Eastern. DeanOfRadio.com, Dean of Comedy at Twitter. Dean, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Nice for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yep. This is, our book today is Playing with Fire, the 1968 election and the transformation of American politics by Lawrence O'Donnell. The first chapter, Seizing the Moment. It starts in 1968. Richard Nixon was in a makeup chair when he met Roger Ailes. Maybe it was the makeup chair that set Ailes off. He was looking at the man who might have been president right now if he had just sat in the makeup chair CBS offered him in Chicago before the first televised presidential debate in American history. Nixon had ignored the network's makeup artist and used a drugstore product called Lazy Shave to cover his heavy 5 o'clock shadow. Nixon once said, "I can shave within 30 seconds before I go on television and still have a beard." The day after the debate, the Chicago Daily News ran the headline, "Was Nixon sabotaged by TV makeup artists?" Richard Daley, the all-powerful Democratic mayor of Chicago, said, "My God, they've embalmed him even before he died." Nixon lost the election to John F. Kennedy by 0.2% of the vote, 49.7% to 49.5%. In an election that close, every mistake matters. A mistake like not getting the makeup right was the kind of thing that infuriated Roger Ailes. Now, 7 years later, Ailes was meeting Nixon for the first time in the makeup room of the Mike Douglas show. At age 26, Ailes looked like an assistant, but he was the boss, the executive producer of the show, and Nixon was once again a presidential candidate in what was beginning to look like a crowded field covering the 1968 Republican nomination. Ailes wanted Nixon to be president, and he knew the most powerful force blocking Nixon's path to the White House was television. To win the White House in the 1960s, you had to understand and respect the power of television. Ailes also knew that one of Nixon's potential rivals for the Republican nomination understood everything about television, Ronald Reagan, the former film and TV actor. Ailes wondered what Nixon had learned about TV since the makeup disaster of the 1960 campaign. Sitting in the makeup chair, Nixon offhandedly mentioned to Ailes how silly it felt to try to reach voters by appearing on an afternoon talk show like this one instead of a news show like Meet the Press. The Mike Douglas show is targeted at housewives and usually populated by B-list showbiz celebrities. In response, Ailes instantly rattled off a list of every bad move Nixon had ever made on TV, and it was a long list. Ailes was a teenager when he'd seen some of these things. This was not the way people talked to former Vice President Richard Milhous Nixon. There was none of the deference Nixon had become accustomed to over the decades, and Nixon loved it. Nixon made Ailes an offer he couldn't refuse. Instead of trying to make Mike Douglas America's biggest afternoon TV star, make Richard Nixon America's next president. With Ailes on the media team, the Nixon campaign was ready to make the move from being the worst TV campaign to the best. "We're going to build this whole campaign around television," Nixon told his media team. "You boys just tell me what to do and I'll do it." Roger Ailes' career in Republican politics, which included every day he ran Fox News, turned out to be longer than Richard Nixon's. Ailes became more influential in Republican politics than Nixon ever was. We have reason to wonder who would be president today if Richard Nixon had not provoked Roger Ailes in the Mike Douglas show makeup room. Such are the seeds that were planted in American politics in the 1968 presidential campaign. "Run, Bobby, run" is the subhead for the next part of this. Bobby was a natural on television. In 1967, he was the only potential presidential candidate who could charm a TV audience just by being himself. All he needed was his smile. Bobby was the Elvis of American politics, the only politician who didn't need a last name to identify him. But his last name was everything. It was Bobby Kennedy's last name that made every potential candidate fear him. As the field of candidates began to take shape in 1967, every campaign calculation depended on Bobby, even when he showed no signs of wanting to run, even when he told people he wasn't going to run. President Lyndon Baines Johnson feared Bobby to the point of obsession. Johnson thought Bobby was the only one who could do the unthinkable, challenge the incumbent president's grip on the Democratic nomination. Johnson was sure that Bobby was the only Democrat who might dare run against him. He was wrong. Nixon feared Bobby too, as did every Republican planning a campaign. Nixon knew exactly what to fear. He had lost to a Kennedy before. Losing to a Kennedy meant losing to the Kennedy political machine, and it meant losing it to the Kennedy style. A political machine can be beaten by a better political machine, though Nixon had never seen a better political machine than the Kennedys. Kennedy's style was something else. Nixon knew there was nothing Ailes could do for his image that could compete with Kennedy's style. Nixon couldn't change his sharply receding hairline. At 54, he was too old to do anything but tamp down his short, dark hair as flat as possible on his head. Bobby's hair had grown longer every year of the 1960s. Now at 42, he had the shaggiest hair in the United States Senate. His little brother Ted was the only other senator with a full head of hair. Bobby's hair was beginning to grow over his ears, rock musician length for the Senate then. And everywhere Bobby spoke outside the Senate chamber, he was treated like a rock star. That's what Nixon and Johnson feared most about Bobby, the way the crowds responded to him. They'd never seen anything like it in politics. Nixon and Johnson were both old enough to remember the first time anyone saw fans screaming and swooning for Frank Sinatra in the 1940s, before, during, and after every song Sinatra sang. America saw an even more intense version of that fan reaction when the Beatles landed in the United States in 1964. And now Nixon and Johnson saw a version of it happening to Bobby. Everywhere Bobby went, crowds worked themselves into frenzies. When he spoke, he didn't sound like any senator they'd heard before. His voice wasn't stiff and self-conscious. The book Playing with Fire by Lawrence O'Donnell.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Tyrone in New York City. Hey, Tyrone, what's up?
Hey, how you doing? I haven't talked to you in a while.
Thanks for calling.
Thanks for taking my call. We got to stop looking for the quick fix. You know, we're up against a major foe, man, in big money interests. They're not looking to give up their power for nothing because they have it. They would rather destroy this country before they turn over their power to a bunch of, what they may consider savages.
Yeah, the rabble, as John Adams used to call us.
Yeah. So now they have all of this power, all of this money, and they're using it very strategically because they are pitting us against each other so that they can keep their power. We need to get smart on stop falling for this race baiting. The higher class thing, whereas, well, this person have more, a little bit more money than me. They living in a one-story house, and they don't have that much more than me. But I want to make sure that they don't do any better. We got to stop. What do you say? Crabs in the barrel. Where we just going against each other. We need to see the big picture instead of just fighting against each other for crumbs.
Yeah,
go
ahead. I'm sorry.
Right. They're gonna continue to fight against healthcare for all, free college, or they're gonna continue to fight against that. We got to understand that this is what they do. And this is not. I don't think this is just a Republican and Democrat thing. I think it's a power thing. Whereas, if I'm a Democrat and I have the power, and I can maintain my power by causing divisions with somebody, or if I'm a Republican and I have the power and I can keep my power by causing divisions with people, I may do that.
Yeah, it's divide and conquer. It's very straightforward. It's the game that they've been playing forever in this country, and they're playing it at the top of their game right now. And you're absolutely right. These oligarchs, these billionaires, are not going to give up without a fight. And that's why they've seized control of our intellectual infrastructure. That's why they've seized control of our courts. That's why they've seized control of our so much of our media. I mean, they are just going full tilt boogie, and it's ahistoric. I mean, or maybe it is historic. Maybe it's consistent with history that eventually societies collapse into feudalism. But that. It kind of belies the history of the last couple hundred years, but we're at a very, very consequential historic turning point. Tyrone, very well said. Thank you very much. Ahmad in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Am I mispronouncing your name? Thanks for listening to AM 950.
No, Tom, you pronounced it correctly, and thank you for taking my call. I've been a long-time listener, but this is the first time calling too as well.
Thank you.
So here's what I want to make a comment real quick, Tom. I basically applaud Nancy Pelosi, and I think for the first time as a progressive, I feel like basically she has more chutzpah than any other Democratic leader I've ever. I am proud of her.
Yeah, me too.
And I think she needs to start forcing bills, the same strategy Republicans are using, and basically naming bills that are negative in the positive light. She needs to start pushing bills on the floor and basically force Mitch McConnell to shut them down. The bills that are helping the middle class. That's what she needs to start doing, and I'm sure she's going to do that. But I think what we need to push as progressive, we need to push that more and strategize and use the same playbook the Republicans have been using forever. And one more last point I want to make, basically, because I know you got a lot of callers. I work in corporate America, and I'm seeing more and more middle-aged white men getting angrier and angrier. Even it's just not on the job. It's like it's just a hate field that Donald Trump is spewing out there, and it's becoming more and more prevalent.
Yeah.
They're getting angrier. They're getting to the point where they're just hating any minority group that walks around them. It's just, I don't know if you're aware about this. This is basically becoming a big problem.
Absolutely. And if you read They Thought They Were Free, Milton Mayer's book about the rise of Hitler in Germany in the 40s, 30s and 40s, this one college professor, German college professor, said to him, eventually you live in a society where hate and fear dominate everything, and you don't realize that your entire society has changed because all the physical stuff hasn't changed. You know, the theater's still there, the opera, the restaurants, you still have a job. It seems all normal, but society has become something completely different. And that's my great fear, is that what is right now, I think, broadly perceived as a temporary aberration might become the new normal for America. And if that's the case, then we are in for a really, really rough road. I got to run, but thank you for the call. Dion, very well said. Dion in Carl Junction, Missouri. Hey, Dion, what's up?
Yeah, I think what I had to say today would probably piggyback pretty well off what that last caller had to say. I took a lot of time off Facebook. I've actually been off for about 4 years, and I recently got back on. And I've noticed that the people the reason I got off was because of the fake news that was on there then. But the people that were putting it on then are just almost insane now. Yeah. I read a post where someone was upset about the Covington Catholic school kids story because of something that Glenn Beck told him to be upset about. And when I tried to confront him that, Glenn Beck is not a good source of information, he literally said, "You cannot change my mind about this."
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the, like, what to do about billionaires, what to do about all this stuff. I think we really have to reach out to our friends and neighbors and get them to I don't know, just see reality. And that's going to be really tough. I think they've been working on this for 20, 30 years to get people to believe something that's not true.
40 years. They rolled this out in 71 as a consequence, or 72 really, as a consequence of the 1971 Powell Memo. That's where this all began. And during that decade of the 70s, you had the billionaires like Joe Coors and the Richard Mellon Scaife and the Koch brothers, all these billionaires pouring all this money into these think tanks. They created Heritage, they created Cato, they created the Federalist Society, they created Fox News ultimately. They created this entire intellectual and media infrastructure, which now has brought us to where we're at.
And the only counterbalance I see in the mainstream media are individuals like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but there isn't an infrastructure anywhere near.
No, you're absolutely right. There's a piece in Politico today about where is the left-wing version of the Federalist Society. There actually is one. It's called the Constitution Society, or a phrase like that, Constitution something. But they've got like 1/10 of the budget of the Federalist Society because you don't have left-wing billionaires who are willing to fund infrastructure like the right-wing billionaires have been funding for literally 40 years. Deanna, I need to move along, but thank you for the call. Lamont in Indianapolis. Hey, Lamont, what's up?
Yes, sir. I have more of a question than a comment, I would say.
Okay, go for it.
As far as the funding that should have gone toward the 800,000 employees that are no longer working right now, is there an oversight committee or some part of the government that oversees every dime of that money when this happens, or?
Well, you've got the Office of Management and Budget, which is run by Mick Mulvaney, which, he doesn't give a rat's ass. He's now Trump's chief of staff. He's the cheerleader for this stuff. But then in Congress, there's a couple of different committees in the House and the Senate that do have oversight over government spending. There's the very broad one. And I'm forgetting the name of it. I think it's Government Oversight is the name of the committee. And then if the spending goes into particular areas, if you're talking about spending for NASA, for example, the committee, the congressional committee that has oversight over NASA would have some say. If it was the Defense Department, it would be the military, the one that has oversight over the military. And so, yeah, there are mechanisms for that oversight, Lamont.
So there's no way they could misappropriate all those millions toward say, a wall or whatever the heck.
They can't legally do that. That's why Trump is going through all these gyrations. The Constitution is very clear. Only Congress can appropriate money, and the executive branch can only spend that money in the way that Congress determined it. And if they do it something other than that, then it's the job of the Supreme Court to step in and stop them. Lamont, I need to move along, but thank you for the call. It's a good one. Cannon in Oroville, Washington. Hey, Cannon, what's up?
Hey, good morning, Tom. Thank you for these great. Thank you for offering a forum for these discourses, truthful discourses.
You're welcome.
Just following a little supposition you made the other day. You know that perhaps this shutdown is, you know, the end game. You know, derailed democracy. You know,
that the goal of Trump was not to build a wall; it was to shut down the government. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, sir. Well, you know, loosely, something else is kind of, you know, kind of connected to that. I was interested in, or just thought about is, you know, I think what I'm seeing with America, there's this trend I've seen over the years. And I just feel like America's, it's like we've been sucker punched for so long that, you know, we've allowed somehow, you know, like mediocrities just kind of become the banner of our time. And, you know, year by year, we've been trained to set, you know, the American people have been trained to accept less and less. Mm-hmm. You know, you know, if you just slowly take away or take a little bites at, you know,
yeah, we saw this in the labor movement. You know, state after state was destroying the ability to unionize, for example. Yeah, and we went from a third of Americans having a good union job with benefits and retirement to 6% right now.
So yeah, exactly. You know, we have it's like we've come. It's like this cat that doesn't have any claws. You take away its claws, you take away its fangs, and then you put it in a fight. You know, what is it going to do? You know.
Yeah. Well, that's what they've done to us, and I think that they and Ken, and thank you for the call. I think they very much think that they've got us in that position, and I'm inclined to think that, you know, they may have us, you know, over a barrel economically. They may have us, you know, frightened by our student debt and things like that. But they don't have our hearts, and they don't have our souls, and ultimately, we're going to have a say.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And it seems to me like the Trump presidency is the straw that is breaking this particular camel's back. I hope anyway. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Let's see here. Patsy in Yakima, Washington. Hey, Patsy, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I have a question. Is there a point that we actually look at this as a government coup that has been going on for quite some time?
Well, I was interested last night to see, the only person in the media who's even talking about anything remotely close to that is Rachel Maddow, who last night asked Kamala Harris if she thought it was possible that, you know, much of the stuff that Trump was doing, he was doing basically on marching orders from Moscow. I think he's doing it on marching orders from oligarchs, frankly, and he's one of them. He used to be part of the Koch network. He used to show up for those events. Now he's the beneficiary of them. But it seems to me like the government takeover really started in 1972 when the Powell memo was rolled out and the billionaire class mobilized themselves. And their first major victory was the Reagan presidency in '81.
Well, I think it actually started before that. I'm looking. I was in second grade when Kennedy was shot, and I think it actually started before that.
Yeah.
That it's been a slow process, but they've been working at it for quite some time. And if it's looked at as a government takeover or coup, is there a different way that we would be handling this?
Yeah. Well, you know, once you put it in that frame, then you identify the coup makers as malefactors, as criminals, as people who have done something wrong. And then,
and I'm sure the people at the plantations in the South had their backers too. So this is what to me is the whole backing of all this.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, and I think you're absolutely right, Patsy. Patsy, thank you for the call. Raj in Detroit, Michigan. Hey, Raj, what's up?
Hey, how are you, Tom? Great show.
Thank you.
I just want to take a moment to divert everyone's attention to the real reason why we have a government shutdown. It has nothing to do with Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi. The real government shutdown is here because if you shut down government agencies in which the New York prosecutors and the Mueller prosecutors cannot get to the IRS and get information to follow the money to the president's inner circle, the investigation stops. And as long as the government stops, the investigation stops. No one's talking about that because you explain to me. Tell me why not talking about that. No investigation as long as we're shut down.
Well, this is the thing. Mueller is actually meeting with his grand jury today, and there's a lot of people speculating that that means that there's going to be indictments tomorrow. I'm wondering if that might be because tomorrow the federal judiciary runs out of money, and you won't be able to convene a grand jury tomorrow. And so Mueller is doing it, you know, trying to get it under the wire. I don't know. I mean, this is pure speculation, but again, the only voice on television has been talking about this is Maddow, and she's been pointing out how this is crippling the FBI, which is Donald Trump's enemy, according to Donald Trump, and it's crippling the judiciary, specifically the grand jury system, which is the principal weapon or tool that Robert Mueller is using. And it sure looks to me like that's absolutely a possibility. Raj, thanks for the call. And frankly, I think that we should start calling it that. You know, we should start talking about Trump is actually trying to blow up the FBI. He's taking down 800,000 employees, 1.2 million contractors, and he's doing it to stop the FBI from investigating him. I think it's entirely a possibility. We'll be back with Bob Ney right after this. Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to content, special content that is generally not available on YouTube or anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week, 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans? What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We'll talk media news and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. On the line with us is the author of Sideswiped, former Ohio Congressman Bob Ney. Bob, welcome back.
Oh, thank you, Tom.
So what's up in the world? First of all, I'm curious to get your take on this. Rachel Maddow's been kind of dancing around the possibility of this. She brought it up last night with Kamala Harris. I've been talking about it a little more bluntly for some time. The possibility that Donald Trump and the billionaire oligarchs, that he is a member of that crowd. I mean, he used to be part of the Koch network and all that kind of stuff. That he's intentionally taking our government down. That this government shutdown was actually the goal. The wall wasn't the goal. The goal was the shutdown. And you could put this in one of two frames, and I'm not sure that they're mutually exclusive. One is Russia wants to cripple the United States, and so Trump is doing their bidding. This is Rachel's perspective on it. Trump is doing their bidding. He's shutting down the FBI and shutting down the federal courts, and so he gets to stop the investigation against him. The other is that the billionaires, the oligarch billionaires who are libertarians, the Kochs, the Thiels, the whatnot, they want to do a demonstration project to show that the United States can still function as a functioning republic with half as many federal workers, because they just hate the federal government, because the federal government tries to regulate their banking and their refineries and all these other things and force them to pay workers a decent wage and all that kind of stuff, and they just want to do away with all that. and that one of these two things or both of these things are happening in a really big way behind the scenes, and the media is just totally afraid to go there for fear of being called conspiracy kooks. What are your thoughts on all this, Bob?
I'm going to go with the second part about the squeeze from the types and likes of the Koch brothers, etc. I'm going to go with that squeeze.
Okay.
I think that's an objective. I think if any side benefits are coming out of the grand jury being squeezed down the federal system, that still is temporary because eventually something has to give on that. And I'll tell you what's going to give, not the want of the grand jury functioning or by the White House or the judiciary, but the fact that air traffic controllers are affected now, the safety of flying is affected now, the safety of airports, the Internal Revenue Service being able to get returns back, money back to people. So eventually they have to solve that one way or the other. And in fact, since you and I first started talking, it went from 3 Republicans to 4 to maybe 9 or 10 now.
Yeah.
They get to the magic 12, then the president has a problem. But I'm going to go with the second theory, though, about squeezing
the oligarchs, the American oligarchs,
et cetera.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And then I'm going to go with one other one too. I don't really think that I think more of the key to all of this thing at the end of the day is not going to be as much Mueller. Yes, Mueller brings out facts. Mueller brings out people getting pressured to obviously talk about things that he needs to find out. I'm still going to go with the fact that New York State is the Achilles heel, because New York State is going to be able to get into the Trump business because Cohen has downloaded every single thing, at least what we think he knows, to the government, and therefore New York State is going to be a key to that.
So all Donald Trump's and his children's frauds and crimes are going to come out.
Well, and what can the White House do if New York State starts to subpoena the children? What can the White House do? They can't refuse. Now today, let's face it, and you know this, Tom. You're a student of how the law works and and how the public perception works. What would happen today if Mueller, which he hasn't been able to do, would say, I'm going to subpoena you, President Trump? Whole constitutional court battle, right?
Yeah.
But if the children are subpoenaed by the state, and if the children are eventually indicted by the state, and if the children are convicted by the state, there's not a thing the president can do in a pardon either.
Yeah, and not to mention Jared Kushner, amazing stuff.
Right.
So what else is going on in the world today, Bob?
Well, I wanted to talk about a little bit of conspiracy theory, I think, with Cohen.
Mm-hmm.
When Cohen says, well, I'm not going to appear because I've been threatened by the president and Giuliani through the tweet, et cetera, and I'm going to lay that to the side for a second. This isn't Cohen's option, by the way. This isn't where Cohen, out of the goodness of his heart, said, I'm going to come talk to the committee. There's been communication between the committee, the House included. Now the Senate's going to subpoena him. So this isn't where, no matter what, he gets to pick and choose, because he can actually talk behind closed doors.
Yeah.
I think there's more to this than we know. I think, in fact, probably Mueller's investigation itself is a bit hesitant on Cohen because he becomes a wild card. Does he start to say things that really messes the entire ball game up, and then all of a sudden he looks like he's sympathetic somehow behind the scenes, a wink and a nod to the White House,
right,
and then is eligible for maybe a pardon?
Oh, wow. So, what's baffled me, Bob, is why the Republican-controlled Senate would subpoena him, and which causes me to wonder, is one of the things that he's afraid of in testifying before the House, that Republicans get to interrogate him too.
Oh, exactly. And I think that was a public, he agreed to a public testimony there. There is no doubt in my mind that if he had testified publicly before the House, an entire series of questions were going to be thrown at him that would do everything under the sun for people to say, wow, how much credibility does this guy have? He's really a scumbag.
Right.
Wow, he's worse than the business that he represented.
Yeah. Yeah, of course,
Sure.
they would do everything
Like a
they could
theater
to just absolutely character assassinate him. I got it.
Sure.
Bob, always great talking with you. Thank you for the insights.
Thank you, Tom.
Great talking with you. Bob Ney, the author of Sideswiped, the book that tells you how D.C. really works. We'll be back. It's Greg Palast is going to drop by and say hi in just a minute. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to content, special content that is generally not available on YouTube or anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week, 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans? What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it. Today from Birthright Citizens, A History of Race and Rights in Antebellum America by Martha S. Jones. In the introduction, Rights of Colored Men Debating Citizenship in Antebellum America is the title of the introduction. The title of William Yates's 1838 treatise, Rights of Colored Men, aptly captures the subject of this book. The 19th century Americans for whom Yates wrote were fascinated by a juridical puzzle. Not slaves, nor aliens, nor the equals of free white men, who were former slaves and their descendants before the law. None were more interested in this question than black Americans themselves, and Birthright Citizens takes up their point of view to tell the history of race and rights in the antebellum United States. The pressures brought on by so-called black laws and colonization schemes, especially a radical strain, explain why free people of color feared their forced removal from the United States. In response, they claimed an unassailable belonging, one grounded in birthright citizenship. No legal text expressly provided for such, but their ideas anticipated the terms of the 14th Amendment. Set in Baltimore, a place between North, South, and the Atlantic world, this book traces the scenes and the debates through which black Americans developed ideas about citizenship and claims to the rights that citizens enjoyed. Along the way, they engaged with legislators, judges, and law's everyday administrators. From the local courthouse to the chambers of high courts, the rights of colored men came to define citizenship for the nation as a whole. Yates authored the very first legal treatise on the rights of free black Americans. It was 1838 when Rights of Colored Men to Suffrage, Citizenship, and Trial by Jury was published in Philadelphia. He was not one of antebellum America's highly regarded legal minds. Some say he read law for a time, although there's no evidence that he was admitted to the bar. Instead, Yates's career began with a short-lived stint as a newspaper publisher in his hometown of Troy, New York. His bona fides on the subject of race and citizenship were best established during his years as an agent for the American Anti-Slavery Society. While many abolitionists maintained a self-conscious distance from free black communities, Yates centered his work there. The oppression of free people of color was a companion to slavery in Yates's view, with anti-slavery work necessarily extending into questions of free people's status. Penning Rights of Colored Men was the pinnacle of this mission. Yates placed a powerful instrument of authority in the hands of free African Americans and their allies. The antebellum legal treatise was a key tool in the standardization and dissemination of legal knowledge and was typically devoted to the comprehensive synthesis of a single branch of law. By the late 1830s, Yates was following on the success of James Kent's commentaries and Joseph Story's treatise series. The genre had come to be associated with the concepts of law as scientific knowledge, legal education as systemic, and the profession as respectable. Yates successfully adopted legal culture's own tool to such a degree that readers from the 19th century until today have regarded him as an authority on free black legal status. But Yates's text was also a work of advocacy. Rights of Colored Men received prominent notices in the black and abolitionist press and could be purchased at local anti-slavery society offices. As a result, the work served as a probing legal treatise that fueled activist arguments. Yates provides a window into the position that some activists, black and white, took on race and citizenship in the end of the 1830s. Law was an instrument of change, and Yates forthrightly explained his objective: to undermine prejudice against color. Racism had led to legal disability, exclusion from militia service, naturalization, suffrage, public schooling, ownership of real property, office holding, and courtroom testimony. Yates was especially unsettled by the disenfranchisement of free black men in New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, and more recently Pennsylvania. Assembling evidence from legal culture, he believed, would help establish the rights and citizenship of free black people. Yates began with a story of the nation's origin. The establishment of the United States, he said, had been at the outset a revolutionary, Republican, and an enlightened undertaking that was untainted by racism or distinctions among and between races. This had been possible in the wake of the American Revolution because the founding generation knew firsthand the contributions black people had made to independence through military service and through labor. American law had originally been colorblind, as evidenced by the absence of racial distinctions in founding documents such as the federal and state constitutions. Change came in the early 19th century at the fault line between generations. A forgetting occurred, Yates posited. Lawmakers of the early republic did not know how black people had contributed to the nation's founding, and hence were entitled to the privileges and immunities of citizens. In this sense, Yates's aim was partly to restore that past to the nation's political and legal memory. To achieve this, he compiled a history of lawmakers and their deliberations, in which he found the development of anti-black prejudice in courts, constitutional conventions, and legislatures. He followed the professional lives of men whose work included roles from low-level administrator to convention delegate and judge. Their ideas about free black people moved with them. Most powerful was Yates's argument about how law, through suffering from amnesia, could be made right. The book, Birthright Citizens, A History of Race and Rights in Antebellum America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of the True People's Media, the Thom Hartmann Program. On the line with us, we've been talking for the last couple hours about the billionaire oligarch takeover of the United States that started in the early 70s after the Powell Memo, that achieved its first major victory in 1981 with the installation of Ronald Reagan as president, after he and his campaign colluded with the Iranians to hold the hostages to hurt Jimmy Carter, and now all the way up to today, the systematic dismantling, not just of the American economy, but also of American democracy by these oligarchs like Wilbur Ross, who says this morning, well, why can't these workers simply go to their bank and ask for a loan? Clueless billionaires on display. But in the meantime, while all this is going on, all this Sturm and Drang and drama, there's actually some real activity happening in the background that you need to know about. Greg Palast is on the line with us, the investigative journalist, author, filmmaker. His most recent, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. GregPalast.com is his website. You can tweet him at Greg_Palast, just like I'm Thom_Hartmann. Greg, welcome back.
Glad to be with you again, Tom.
It's always great talking to you, Greg. So tell us about the de-Trumping of America, to use your phrase.
Okay. Well, while we've been talking about whether we should have slats or drones in the desert to eliminate the iguanas crossing the border in nowhere, the real wall, the real battle, is happening in the immigration courts, and we have 9 million green card holders who are eligible to become voting citizens, and they're being held up. That's the real wall that Trump has put up. In just his short 2 years, he's nearly doubled. In fact, probably by the end of this stoppage, he's doubled the number of citizenship cases that are backlogged to, are you ready, to 800,000, nearly 1 million. And so it's also discouraging and costly and difficult for new people to even apply. Here's some of the numbers that are very important when you talk about de-Trumping America. Okay, there are 960,000, nearly 1 million Texans who do not have green cards but don't have citizenship. That's nearly 1 million. and yet Beto O'Rourke only lost by 215,000 votes. The number of green card holders who could become voting citizens is 3 times the margin of Stacey Abrams' loss in Georgia. And if you took Michigan and Pennsylvania and Florida, which has 1 million, just Florida alone has 1 million people waiting for the courts to give them citizenship who are green card holders, Trump would have been crushed in the Electoral College. If we can move...
That's because he beat Clinton in Florida by 100,000 votes, basically?
Yeah, in Florida, Trump won officially by 113,000 votes. Of course, a lot of that was steal, but nevertheless, it's just 113,000 votes, which is about, there's 8 green card holders who can vote, who could be eligible to vote if they get their citizenship. Trump has been blockading citizenship. That's the real wall while we're all distracted with
How is he doing this, Greg? How is he doing this?
One, he's put all kinds of new, new rules on how the immigration operation runs. So it's a priority. When you have a criminal case throwing someone out or you detain someone, that becomes a priority in all citizenship cases, civil cases, go by the boards. You've also had a...
So wait a minute. You're saying that the internal court system, as it were, I'm sure I'm mangling the language here, but you correct me, that the internal system that processes people, green card holders who want to become citizens and turns them into citizens is the exact same infrastructure that deals with somebody that ICE catches who they say this guy is...
Widely. I mean, there are different parts of our whole immigration apparatus. But here's what's really important. We don't have the funds. We don't have, and also right now, remember when Trump came in, you had a lot of scared green card holders that, oh my God, I better get citizenship. You're talking about 9 million people, many of whom have been waiting around figuring, well, I'm okay, I can just wait another 5, 10 years. Many do, and now they're not. So if we could get these people, if we could get these Americans, I have a friend who's from Honduras, came here at the age of 7. If, he can't get it right now with the shutdown and other problems at the INS, it's a mess, and not the INS, it's now ICE and the other immigration agencies. He could be a voter, and he wants to be a voter. We could transform America. And by the way, Trump did offer over $500 million for 75 judges and assistant personnel to begin moving the backlogs at the immigration agencies. That's not something that, it's not much talked about. We're talking about slats and drones, but that's actually serious stuff.
Was that because he wanted to pack the immigration courts with right-wing, hardline judges who would simply say no to pretty much every immigrant, or particularly every immigrant of color who wanted to be a U.S. citizen?
No question, but in the end, if we don't process the applications, we're not going to get the people who are here, who are Americans, who've been here most of their lives, a lot of their lives, and want to be citizens. We can transform America. It's not going to be easy. Trump is the president, and it's everything he's doing is ugly. But we should be concentrating on making citizens, voting citizens of the Americans who are here, immigrant Americans.
So what can we do?
Change everything.
How do we do that, Greg? I mean, what can the average person do? Who can they call? Where do you start trying to help these 9 million people become U.S. citizens?
Well, I know it's a massive backlog, but let's make the backlog even bigger. Everyone knows someone holding a green card. Encourage them and help them. There are groups like Catholic Charities and others who are working to help people process applications from green card to citizenship. Let's really make this a big push. The second is, I think that's where, I'm sorry, but I know you might hate what I'm about to say. Nancy Pelosi should walk into the Oval Office and start bargaining and talking about that $500 million, the extra judges. Let's talk about making the immigration system and the citizenship machinery work. Because if you get more citizens, Trump's out of a job.
Yeah, I wouldn't entangle that with responding to political blackmail, to hostage taking. But I get what you're saying. I have a friend who's a green card holder, and he's concerned, let's say, that if he applies for citizenship, that he's putting a target on his back, that he's saying to Trump, I might be one of the people that you don't want here, and his comfortable, regular renewal of his green card might be at risk.
No question. I'm talking to my friend, I won't give his last name, obviously, Ramon from Honduras. has been told by his family, because many were killed by death squads, that he'll be dead within a week if he's sent back to Honduras. They've lost, they've lost his green card re-app. Yes, people are scared. That's why I say help people we need to support groups like Catholic Charities and LULAC and other organizations that are, in fact, helping people go through the process and have lawyers and have protectors when they're making this application. Now, keep in mind, let's not overdo the fear and push people away, because there are 9 million people with green cards, and while Trump has talked about canceling green cards, that hasn't happened. There might be a few rare cases, but basically 9 million people can go and get citizenship. Obviously, everything's shut down now. No one's becoming a citizen. I mean, Trump did a little ceremony in his office, but basically the system is gummed up in a mess. This is a big, big group of potential voters that could utterly transform the political landscape of America, and we should be concentrating on that. And I'm sorry, whether it's slats or drones in the desert is not going to make a big difference. What's going to make a difference is making citizens of Americans who are here.
Yeah, no, I get it. Greg, before we end the segment, I'm curious what the status of interstate crosscheck is. I understand that Illinois just said no to it.
Another one bites the dust. Illinois, where the Reverend Jesse Jackson and I have filed a federal lawsuit against the state for being in Chris Kobach's ridiculous, racist, wrongful interstate crosscheck program. The state Board of Elections voted 8-0 to dump the interstate crosscheck program, a horrible racist purge program. The thing is, the Reverend Jackson and I are not dropping our suit because there are 550,000, that's over 500,000 people, who have been purged from the voter rolls. Our estimate...
Just in Illinois?
Just in Illinois, about 73% were wrongly removed, over 100,000 by the crosscheck program. And so we're not going to stop until the people are returned to the voter rolls. And by the way, you go to gregpalast.com and you can look up, if you're in Illinois, if you are on the purge list, go to the top of my site, look it up, see if your name's there, and re-register. Most people who have been removed have no idea they've been removed. I don't want you to be surprised in 2020. We're trying to get you restored, but, we have to deal with Trump's courts.
Was this the consequence of was it Bruce Rauner, the Republican billionaire who was who was governor of the state? Was this his thing?
He was booted, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
And
he's out now.
So what happened was the Republicans had blocked getting out of crosscheck in a 4-4 vote of the Board of Elections. Now it's 8-0 to get out, in part because, frankly, thank you, Tom, you have really helped me make crosscheck a national issue, something that people hadn't heard of, and now it's kind of poisonous. It's got a lot of publicity in Illinois, in Indiana, in Georgia, in all these states.
Right.
And states are pulling out. Kentucky pulled out. Massachusetts pulled out. It's mostly GOP states at this point. It is imploding. And by the way, my next target, we filed suit in Kansas. We think we can, where it's the state of Kansas which processes this, creates this whole phony purge list. I think we're going to be able to stop crosscheck in its cradle since Kobach was removed.
From your lips to God's ears, Greg. The great Greg Palast, the investigative journalist, author, filmmaker, his most recent The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. GregPalast.com is the website. You can tweet him at Greg_Palast. Greg, thank you.
You're welcome, Tom. Bye.
Keep up the great work and keep us up to date. I really appreciate it, and it's always great having you on the show. We will be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
How do we purge ourselves of the influence, this pernicious influence of the billionaire classes, think tanks, and media operations? And welcome back. Leonard in South Pasadena, California. Hey, Leonard, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. How you feeling?
Great. What's up?
Okay, I have this idea as an alternative to capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
It's called mutualism.
Okay.
We work in the mutual benefit of each other.
Right, I've heard that word before. It goes back to the old insurance form back in the 1920s, wasn't it? The mutual benefit corporations, these were the early insurance companies?
Omaha.
Yeah, Mutual of Omaha was one of them, yeah.
Yeah.
So how would
instead of competing, I feel it's best for us to work with each other. I think it's more.
So how does this work, Leonard? I get the philosophy. How does it work?
Well, you have employee-owned companies.
Okay.
That's one of them. And the thing to do is to set the table for mutualism. Capitalism must go. It's a greedy, it's an unfair, cruel, immoral system which has harmed the people for too many years from the inception. It's time for the people to truly rule. Democracy will be friendly with mutualism, but not in capitalism. We kind of do it generally anyway.
No, I get it, and I totally agree with you, Leonard. This is at the core of Richard Wolff's whole thing. That we need to go to employee-owned co-ops. Spot on, Leonard. Thank you for the call. Jared in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jared, what's up?
Hello, Tom. I want to talk about Venezuela and what's going on down there.
Mm-hmm.
There seems to be a lot of disinfo being spread about Venezuela, and namely this idea that Nicolas Maduro is a dictator. I have not seen any evidence of that at all. I've seen evidence that he's won re-election in landslide victories after the opposition boycotted the election. I mean, you can't claim that, you had a right to vote, but you didn't vote. So you can't claim that it's a dictatorship if you're not the one voting.
Yeah.
And the opposition is generally, from the opposition, from what I've been looking up, it's mostly all people of the right wing that's trying to pose as progressive or, using very sneaky kind of tactics. And the people and the countries that are supporting the opposition in Venezuela are mostly the imperialist nations.
No, the very wealthy in Venezuela. I mean, they've been going after Hugo Chavez forever. He dies. They're going after Maduro now. That said, though, I mean, you've got inflation that's like 10,000% a year right now in Venezuela. Their economy is just collapsing. That can't all be the consequence of billionaires trying to pull the legs out from underneath the economy. I mean, there has to be an element of mismanagement in there, isn't there?
Well, I can tell you for a fact that since the sanctions that started under President Obama, there wasn't any sanctions before. And with the oil market, I would say that there is some mismanagement under Maduro, but I would not lay even 30%.
So you're saying basically the billionaires are taking the country down. I get it. They've got the second largest oil reserves regionally in the world. Of course the billionaires want them. We'll be back. Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to content, special content that is generally not available on YouTube or anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week, 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans? What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. What do we do with a body politic that has been contaminated by the billionaire class. You've got a billionaire in the White House. You've got a billionaire running a news network that feeds the billionaire in the White House. You've got billionaire-funded and run think tanks all over the country. You've got billionaire-owned media. You've got billionaire-owned banks. You've got billionaire-owned lobbying firms. You've got billionaire-run think tanks. How do we extract ourselves from this? Or will it be like the 1920s, 1929, and a great crash will do it for us? Although that great crash assumes that you've got, on the other side of the crash, somebody like Franklin Roosevelt, because Germany went through the same thing we went through in the late 1920s, early 1930s with the worldwide Great Depression. And the guy who stepped up in Germany said, "I alone can fix it." And they put him in charge. Didn't work out so well. So how do we do this? Howard in Muncie, Indiana. Hey, Howard, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How you doing?
Fine.
A couple quick comments. First, on the billionaires, which I know you want to get rid of them, which a lot of people do, but I'll just make a comment about that. People have to remember that billionaires do provide a great service in our capitalist system, plus other systems.
That's not a service. They're parasites.
No, let me finish. They provide money to invest. They invest in things. So when you invest in things, you build a capital. And if you do not build capital, what will happen? You will have unemployment. A lot of people...
Howard, you do not need billionaires to invest in things. The average American can invest in things. Entrepreneurs start businesses. They start them from scratch more often than not. I've started 3 or 4 companies with lines of credit. I started a company with an American Express $15,000 line of credit and turned it into a multi-million-dollar company. It doesn't take a billionaire to start anything, Howard.
I'm not talking about starting a company. I'm talking about building capital. There's 2 different things. Building capital is different from starting a company.
We don't. Howard, we had no billionaires prior to the 1980s. How did we get by?
We had some billionaires before then, but the economy was not as big. The economy has grown. It's bigger now, so people get more money. It is not a crime to become a billionaire.
No, it's not, but it's a moral failing to have a country where you've got billionaires growing at, the wealth of the top 1% growing at a rate of over 800% since 1980, at the same time that the wealth of average working people has actually declined. That's wrong. We've got a structural system that allows billionaires to become, worth more and more and more. I mean, when I started this show, the Koch brothers were only worth $4 or $5 billion. Then they were worth $10 billion. Then they were worth $20 billion. Now they're worth $80 billion. I mean, the average American family is not seeing that at all in the last 15 years. In fact, they're seeing their purchasing power go down. What you're describing and what you are praising is a system that allows wealthy people to get massively wealthier and locks the rest of us out from that process.
Tom, I'm not praising it. I'm just saying this is what it does. This is how people use that money.
It doesn't create capital. It is seizing capital, Howard. When Bill Gates is stashing money in his Swiss bank account, how is that helping me?
They loan out money. They build factories that puts people to work.
What builds a factory, Howard, is demand. When people are buying product, those are the resources that build factories. I know that Americans want to believe this. I know that Ronald Reagan tried to sell us this idea. Just let the rich people get richer and everything will be wonderful. It hasn't worked out. 27 minutes past the hour, coming up on 28.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Yeah, this is the place where, we ask, is Walmart a person? And we answer, no, not a chance. No way. Forget it. For our book club today, we're reading from a book edited by Cynthia McKinney. It's a compiled collection of essays titled How the U.S. Creates, shall we say, S-hole countries. I can't say that word on the air. And this is from her introduction, a deeper look at Trump's epithet, S-hole country. I wish I could take full credit for the idea of doing a book on President Trump's unfortunate characterization of some countries as S-hole countries, verified recently by fired ex-White House staffer Omarosa Manigault. The idea was brought to me by a Facebook friend, and I immediately saw the brilliance of that idea. Although at the time the president tried to walk back the revelation that he used such language to describe certain countries, he couldn't help himself. And during the visit of Nigeria's president to the White House, he doubled down on that characterization, saying that certain countries were tough places to live. It was only recently that Omarosa confirmed that, yes, the president had described certain countries as asshole countries. The media had a field day with the, at the time, alleged remarks. Steve Dempsey of the Bay Area News Group compiled a slideshow of cartoons from national news outlets that lambasted the president. Lambasted, whatever it is. The Mercury News Online ran the slideshow that included hilarious cartoons by Rick McKee at the Augustus Chronicle and Bob Englehart with Kegel Cartoons and others. Mark Schuller, writing in the Huffington Post, noted, Haiti has been targeted for its decisive role in challenging what Southern planters, including 8 U.S. presidents, called a peculiar institution. The Haitian Revolution was the first time slaves were able to permanently end slavery and forge an independent nation. It was also a tipping point in U.S. history, leading to the 1803 Louisiana Purchase, paving the way for U.S. manifest destiny stretching from sea to shining sea and eventual dominance. Chicago, the country's third largest city, was founded by a Haitian, Jean-Baptiste Pont-du-Sable, who Haitian historian Mark Rosier called an agent of the Haitian government to pursue a pro-freedom international policy. End of quote from that. Jen Kirby went farther, and in an online media outlet, Vox, interview with a Stanford University history professor, the word eugenics was used as a descriptor for what Trump's characterization actually represented. Stanford professor Anna Minion said of the interview, what Trump said was basically a form of eugenics, in which he's saying, this is the population we want, people from places like Norway, white people. We don't want people from African countries or from Haiti. That's what's really symbolic here. Minion makes it clear that in the U.S. immigration debate, legality became a proxy for race without anyone overtly talking about it. Ryan Teague Beckwith and Maya Roden of Time magazine added their 2 cents worth to the discussion of the president's choice of words by choosing to discuss the immigration laws that occasioned Trump's telling words. They began their discussion this way. President Donald Trump's S-hole countries comment ricocheted around the world, spurring criticism from U.S. allies, rebuttals from Americans with roots in those countries, and condemnation from some in his own party. Reaction was swift around the world, including from those countries so characterized by the president. Zambia even humorously featured Trump's words in a tourism advertisement at Appeal. My Facebook friend thought that the president's words should occasion a deeper look at what these so-called S-hole countries were, how they were created, and why they continue to exist. And that is exactly what the contributors to this book do. Sort of like the proverbial turtle sitting on a fence post, you know these countries didn't get the way they are without some help. And it's precisely that help from the U.S., its allies, its multinational corporations, its military, and United Nations peacekeeping operations in Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, which it also controls, on which this book focuses. Thus, the U.S. relationship to conditions in these countries is clear from U.S. military occupation of Haiti, financing of death squads in El Salvador, and support for dictators in all of them, indeed, all across the African continent. Therefore, for our purposes, an S-hole country is a country whose residents present quality of living conditions that can be tied to historical or current U.S. foreign and military policies that have negatively impacted the ability of that state to deliver quality of life policies to its residents. In this regard, for too many U.S. residents, the U.S. itself could be characterized as an S-hole country, resulting from its deliberate choice to fund the war machine and corporate policies that produce negative consequences for the countries and territories, in some cases colonies, that are profiled here. The United States, as itself a S-hole country, could be explored in much depth in future efforts. The characterization of certain countries as S-hole countries has captured the imagination of the global community, whether the localities and individuals concerned are for or against U.S. President Donald J. Trump. This book seizes this unique moment when attention of people inside and outside the U.S. is focused on the president's alleged words to explain the structure of international politics, the conditions inside certain countries, specific U.S. policies that created or maintain those conditions, and the consequence of those policies on U.S. residents themselves. How the U.S. Creates S-Hole Countries by Cynthia McKinney, or edited by.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, picking up your phone calls. Corky in Rochester, New York. Hey, Corky, what's up?
Yeah, you know, of course, I'm not religious. I don't believe in anything, but I was forced by my mother to go to catechism class.
Mm-hmm.
One of the stories I never forgot was the guy who was sitting at the table eating, and the peasants were crawling around the floors picking up the crumbs that he dropped.
Right.
And then Christ asked him, "Is this what you call feeding the poor?" And he said, "Well, I let him in my house. I let him pick up the crumbs that I dropped." And that's what it seems like is going on with this administration.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, well, and it's kind of, you know, a variation on the philosophy that says you got to have billionaires to invest in companies, otherwise you can't have companies. I mean, what happened before billionaires? Yeah, spot on, Corky. Very well said. Thank you. Daniel in Charlottesville, Virginia. Hey, Daniel, what's up?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, just fine.
All right. Yeah, I was going to say, I think that I was listening to Joe Madison's show this morning, and he was talking about this SOS thing, about the TSA shutting down.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting there thinking, wouldn't that help Trump? Because, I mean, he'll basically just use it and say, okay, it's a national emergency now, so I'm gonna go ahead and end the government shutdown. And then he could say that, you know, he could save face by saying that he ended the crisis or whatever, you know.
It's a possibility. I mean, there are people now openly speculating. I am not among them, but there are people openly speculating wondering out loud, is it possible that Trump really does want to break the system, that he really does want a couple of planes to collide with each other in midair, or that he does want an airport to get shut down because there's not enough TSA officers, and then as a consequence of that, although the planes in the air is much more dramatic, and as a consequence of that, he gets to play George Bush on 9/11. He gets to say, we've got a national emergency, I'm invoking my emergency powers, we're going to start putting people in Gitmo, you know, blah-de-blah-de-blah. That's the downside, Daniel. I think you're right. That's the extreme downside. On the other hand, you know, I've been saying for a long time, I absolutely agree with Joe Madison. I think that the pressure point, the point of maximum pressure that can be put on the Trump administration and on the Republican Party in general, and certainly on Mitch McConnell in the Senate, is, you know, air travel. And I'm not talking about crashing planes. I'm talking about, you know, shutting down the TSA pre-lines, or, you know, TSA agents just not showing up for work. And obviously the government knows this, Daniel, because just this morning the federal government sent out a notice to all their workers that if they don't show up for work, they're going to be considered AWOL and they might lose their jobs, which is going to get people back to work even if they're not being paid. So, you know, we'll see where it goes. Daniel, thanks for the call and thanks for listening to SiriusXM. Michael in Imperial Beach, California. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hey, Mr. Hartmann. Okay, I wanted to talk to you about the mindset of the current doctors, lawyers, professors of today who think they're set for life. With this new worldwide Gilded Age we are now experiencing, the Koch brothers, Putin and his Russian mafia, China government and their oligarchs, and what you told me before is that there has been an increase of billionaires building basically palaces underground. You pointed out New Zealand. I'm going all over the world.
Oh, they're all over the Midwest. They're refurbishing old missile silos and turning them into, you know, $100 million, 40-foot underground estates for billionaires. Yeah.
I call them a palace. Okay, so with Britain in chaos over Brexit, Putin, America in chaos over Trump, Putin, NATO's future in peril, Putin, and with Russia only having a GDP of $1.75 trillion, which is nothing. So what are your thoughts about when the Rubicon has been passed by these billionaires, they go into their underground palaces. Do these doctors, lawyers, professors of today who think they're set for life, will they be any different from the rest of us poor people, like what happened in 1929, Tom?
Well, it's already largely happening, Michael. First of all, I think that we're radically overestimating the power of Vladimir Putin in Russia. As you point out, their economy is about the same size as Texas. And, you know, you can be up to mischief, but I think that the real force that is taking down our republic, that has been damaging the United States, it was, you know, I mean, this started back in the 70s and the 80s when Vladimir Putin was, you know, a lowly KGB agent in East Berlin. You know, you may not like his behavior, but this is corruption from within, number one. And number two, the doctors and lawyers increasingly are simply the high end of the American middle class. You know, there are a few who are making millions of dollars, you know, the oncologists and the big, you know, the big tort lawyers. But by and large, what you're finding is that these people are in the same straits that all the rest of us are, and being just as badly screwed by the billionaires. Michael, thank you for the call. Jerry in Milwaukee. Hey, Jerry, thanks for listening to 1505 AM. What's up?
Hi, how are you?
Good.
My question to you is this: how do we, including you, myself, and anyone else, know that Donald Trump is a billionaire?
Oh, I don't believe that he is. I believe that Donald Trump has a negative net worth. I think he is under. If he hasn't been underwater for the last 30 years or much of the last 30 years, you know, I would be very surprised. He may not be.
Why are we calling him a billionaire, though?
Because he proclaims that he is, and because Forbes magazine says that he's worth a little over $1 billion.
The Forbes is speculating.
Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right, Jerry. You're absolutely right. I don't care whether he's a billionaire or you know, homeless. I mean, the guy is toxic. He's poison to this country.
I think he's more in the line of Al Capone, Gotti. I think he's a gangster. He and Giuliani.
Yep.
And I really believe that. I really believe.
Oh yeah, and look at what he just said to Michael Cohen. Nice little family you got there. Be a shame if anything happened to your father-in-law or your wife. It's incredible. Thank you for the call, David in Nantucket, Connecticut, or how do you say that town? Naugatuck?
Naugatuck.
Naugatuck. Okay, what's up, David?
Hi, I just wanted to call it this whole discussion of billionaires. It brings me back to the 1896 election, the Cross of Gold, where William Jennings Bryan said to President McKinley, "You're crucifying us on a cross of gold."
Yes.
What happened then is that gold was not as plentiful as silver, so there was deflation because he limited the money supply.
Right.
These billionaires are in effect limiting our money supply. When Bezos' worth goes sky high, he's taking money out of the economy. Also, the flip side of his billions of dollars is debt. When he puts money in the bank, for him to get interest, we have to all, or whatever he has his money in, we all have to pay. We all have to be incurred with debt for him to have his value.
Right. No, good points. And it's a good rebuttal to the guy who is like, yeah, no, you got to have billionaires to have a functioning economy. No, it's the other way around. David, well said. Thank you. Steve in Davenport, Washington. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hi. Thanks for taking my call. How are you doing today?
I am great, but I'll get better, Steve. How about you?
Well, I hear so many things, but the topic I wanted to talk about was hearing about the government shutdown, and I only hear on news about how it's affecting the government employees that aren't getting paid.
Right.
And I think that it's affecting the country in a larger manner.
Oh, yeah, wait until there's an epidemic of E. coli because USDA has been basically laid off. You know, wait until people start dropping dead because their blood pressure medications are contaminated and the FDA inspectors are gone. Wait until, God forbid, planes fall out of the sky because, the FAA is overstretched. I mean, it's just, you're absolutely right, Steve. And then Trump brings back the guys from Interior to rapidly facilitate the transfer of federal lands over to the oil, uranium, and coal billionaires. Yeah, it's nuts.
That is horrible. So just to pick one area, I don't know if there's a Department of Agriculture.
Yes, there is.
Okay. Farmers, family-owned farmers aren't able to get loans and crop insurance right now. And the only people that I can imagine is going to gain from family farms failing is people that are going to buy them up and make them into commercial farms.
Yeah. And that's this is the trend. We're seeing a rebooting of basically the Gilded Age under Ronald Reagan. When Ronald Reagan came in and stopped enforcing the Sherman Act, you had big ag companies that controlled the price because they were the wholesale distributors. They controlled the price of agricultural products. They started reducing those prices. And there wasn't a lot of pressure on them to change that policy because everybody loved the fact that food was getting cheaper in the United States in the 80s. They started reducing those prices, which bankrupted literally millions of American farmers. And then they went in and bought up their farms and said to the farmers, you can still live in your house, but we now own it. And you can still work that farm, but you're working for us. And, Willie Nelson was out there doing his farm aid stuff, trying to rescue some of these farmers. But the bottom line is that a massive percentage of the American farm economy turned from small business into giant corporations. It's happening again right now. You're absolutely right, Steve. And it's a terrible thing. Steve, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Sue in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Hey, Sue, what's up? Thanks for listening to Sirius XM.
Hey, nice to talk with you. I guess my question is, why are we demonizing Trump whenever historically anybody that's ever been a politician has had a shady background? The Kennedys basically ran a government-funded brothel. Anybody that was associated with the Clintons either died or mysteriously disappeared.
Oh, come on, Sue.
Yeah.
The Jack Kennedy, the thing that I think is really interesting, and actually you raise an interesting point. Jack Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, I know some of these folks, and I didn't know Jack and Bobby, but I know Bobby's son, Bobby Jr. The Joe Kennedy and his wife Rose, you think what you want about how they got their money, and I used to be very good friends with Gloria Swanson, and she just hated Joe Kennedy. But one of the things that they inculcated in their kids was this sense of noblesse oblige, the French European word for the obligation of nobility to help out, right? You're rich, and because of that, you have a greater burden, you have a greater obligation to help the world, to improve the world than the average person has. And Jack Kennedy believed that. Bobby, he might have wanted to get it on with a few ladies on the side, but that was the 60s. But Jack Kennedy believed that was his life's work, was to make the world a better place, that's what he had to commit himself to. Bobby believed that. Teddy believed that. Yes, they had all kinds of personal failings, Chappaquiddick, everything else. It's all real. But they believed that their job was to make the world better. Fred Trump said to his son Donald, your job is to steal essentially as much as you can. Donald Trump, one of his jobs when he was working for his dad was marking the applications of people who wanted to rent from Fred if they were black people with a C so that they could be rejected, C for colored. I mean, Donald Trump was raised as a narcissist. He was raised, you don't have any obligation to anybody except yourself. It's get all you can. That's what it's all about. And he has surrounded himself with people who have the same mentality. This is his cabinet. This is Betsy DeVos. This is Wilbur Ross. This is Rick Perry. This is all these guys at the trough. And it's night and day, Sue. I don't see how you can draw any kind of parallel between the two of them.
I'm just saying anybody that's ever been in any power situation has also taken liberties. It's not just Trump. The Kennedys, I'm sure, have a more sorted...
Sue, I don't care how many women Jack Kennedy slept with. If he's creating an economy and a world that is safe, if he's keeping the world safe, from nuclear war, if he is expanding social safety net programs that keep people from falling into poverty and dying, if he's launching programs as he did, vaccination programs, public health programs, the space program for that matter, that transformed America in many ways, all the inventions that came out of it. If he's doing the job of governance, frankly, I don't care who he's sleeping with. I think that your false equivalence is, I'm sorry, Sue, this phony false equivalence that, Fox News tries to promote and right-wing hate radio tries to promote. Oh, the Kennedys were it's BS. It is absolute BS. It's a nonsense. It's not real. And we need to forcefully, reject it whenever some, poor deluded soul comes along and say, well, I heard this from Sean Hannity.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Fox News talking points do not work. here on this program. We'll be back. It's 48 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Alina in Seattle, Washington, listening on KBCS. Hey, Alina, what's up?
You talking to me here?
I am. You're on the air.
Oh, hi.
Hey.
It's Elena.
Elena,
thank you so much for taking my call. I wanted to comment on your divide and conquer theory.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of corporations in the U.S.,
right.
So I agree with that. The only exception to this is when they need us to go to war with some country to make money.
Right. Yeah, and
so I was reading. There's a really great article on truthout.org. The author is Barbara Ellis,
mm-hmm.
and it's called "U.S. Taxpayers Have Been Funding Big Businesses Wars for 233 Years." And what fascinated me about the article is that the Navy was actually started to fight the pirates who were attacking, those ships with.
Yeah, the Barbary pirates in the Revolutionary era.
Yes.
So, therefore, what?
Well, therefore, we need to understand that, we can't fall for these tricks anymore.
Yeah.
Starting wars for no reason.
Yeah.
It's in the history of this country, and we've been falling for it.
You're absolutely right.
Hundreds of years.
You're absolutely right, Elena. In fact, somebody had shared with me earlier today a list of basically all the countries that we've tried to take down. I'll have to do it another day. But yeah, spot on. Elena, thank you very much for the call. It's nice to hear from you. Catherine in Burlington, Vermont. You're on the air, Catherine.
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I was thinking in answer to your how do we purge and fight the oligarchs, what about public service announcements?
Well, you'd have to bring back the fairness doctrine, programming in the public interest, to cause radio and television stations to begin carrying them once again. I think you're dating yourself, Catherine. Most people who are under 30 don't even know what a PSA is. They've never heard one.
Well, no, they have them for cigarettes.
Where?
On TV.
Oh, okay. Those are not actually public service announcements. Those are things that the tobacco industry has to pay for as a result of a lawsuit.
Oh, that's right.
A public service announcement is where the station carries it for free.
60s. I'm 58.
Yeah, there you go.
I remember when I was a kid, they had them a lot.
Oh yeah. When I started in radio back in '67, whenever we had a commercial break, and your commercial breaks were basically predefined, they were hard, and whenever you had a commercial break and the salespeople couldn't sell a spot, we'd slip in a PSA. There'd be a thing about not smoking or a thing about wearing your seatbelt or whatever. Yeah, those are gone.
Well, that's all. And then T-shirts. Make a bunch of T-shirts and stickers.
That say what?
Bumper stickers. And sell them cheap.
That say what?
$5 a T-shirt.
That say what?
Democratize the enterprise, for example.
Okay.
What Richard
Little abstract.
Wolff says.
Yeah.
Co-ops are the way out.
How about no billionaires?
Okay, no billionaires.
Okay. Catherine, thank you for the call. Thanks for watching us on YouTube. We'll be right back. It's coming up on, 52 minutes. Well, it's a little after 52 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to content, special content that is generally not available on YouTube or anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week, 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company
and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans. What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And the consequences of this are going to be... And just a couple of quick little notes. The Daily Show, the tweet of the day, right? Trump can't just, it's talking about the State of the Union. Trump can't just show up somewhere he's not invited. This isn't the dressing room at Miss Teen USA. Brilliant. And then this, Sean shared this with me, 47% of Canadian respondents. This was a survey that was done in Canada. 47% of Canadians say that there are a great deal or many neo-Nazis in the United States. In Canada, they say only 17% of Canadians say that there is a great deal or many neo-Nazis in Canada. 47%. Wow. Stephen in East Elmhurst, New York. Hey, Stephen, what's on your mind today?
Tom, I have a son that works for the TSA, and thankfully I'm in a position, where I can keep him on his feet until the shutdown is over. But here's what I'm worried about. They have a massive sick out. Trump uses it as an excuse to bring in private security firms, and the TSA, most of the workers, loses their job.
So he does it just the same way Reagan did with the air traffic controllers in '81.
Yep.
Yeah. It's a possibility, Stephen, and it's got to be a possibility that the union that represents the TSA is thinking about. I think if there was a nationwide strike or walkout or sick out or whatever you want to call it, that that's a very real possibility. In fact, I would say probability. But if it just happens at Hartsfield after the Super Bowl, maybe not. Although it's hard to say. I mean, maybe they would just say, okay, that's it. We're going to take down the TSA here. It's not like they don't have, the resources and the means to seriously punish people. And so probably a lot of TSA people, scratching their head and thinking about it. Stephen, thank you for interjecting a note of a reality check into this conversation. I do appreciate it. Joe in Augusta, New Jersey. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
How you doing, Tom? I'm a big fan of yours. I have a son who's a federal agent who took an oath of the Constitution to protect it.
Yes.
And I am very, very upset with the remarks from Wilbur Ross that he just doesn't understand why people are on the poverty line, getting, my wife pointed this out. Excuse me for 1 second. I'm just very upset at this whole thing. He just blatantly just doesn't get it.
Yeah.
That's it. And I'm sick and tired of these. I have to watch my mouth.
Thank you.
I'm with you, man. And I'm just very, very upset with this guy who's in charge of this administration. He's nothing but a clown, and he needs to be put down. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Well, politically put him down, yeah. Joe, thank you for the call. I'm sure Joe was not speaking of violence. I certainly wouldn't, and we wouldn't brook such a conversation on this program. Wow. So, be thoughtful when you call in, no matter how upset you are. I get it. The Senate is voting right now on whether or not to reopen the government. It looks like it's not going to happen. But, another chance. Your senator's telephone number, 202-224-3121, if you want to let them know what you think. And in the meantime, we'll be back tomorrow. Don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. So please, get engaged. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.